The crime boss who never flinched at blood or bullets felt his world tilt when he saw bruises on a pregnant maid's wrist. But it wasn't just any woman hiding in his mansion. It was Alara Quinn, the fearless girl who defended him when he was nothing, now broken and running from a monster worse than any he'd ever faced. She didn't recognize him. She didn't know the boy she saved had become the most dangerous man in New York. But Ronan Vale remembered everything, and he was about to remind the world why mercy was never part of his vocabulary. If you want to see how far love and vengeance can push a man who answers to no one, stay until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story reaches. The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the windows of the Vale estate into rivers of fractured light. Ronan Vale stood in his study, a glass of bourbon untouched on the mahogany desk, his phone pressed to his ear as Marcus Sullivan delivered his weekly security report with the precision of a man who understood that wasted words could cost him his job, or worse. "Eastern Territory is locked down," Marcus said. "The Kozlov situation is handled. They won't be a problem anymore." Ronan's gaze drifted to the window. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the sprawling grounds that stretched into darkness beyond the manicured lawns and security gates. Somewhere out there, his world ran like clockwork. Money moved through legitimate businesses that barely concealed their true purpose. Debts were collected, territories were maintained, and enemies learned too late that crossing Ronan Vale meant crossing a line they'd never walk back from. "What about the shipment?" Ronan asked. "Cleared customs this morning, no complications." "Then why are you still talking?" Marcus hesitated. In the 7 years he'd worked for Ronan, he'd learned to read the silence between words, the temperature drop in a conversation that meant he was walking on ice that could crack at any moment. "There's one more thing. Nothing urgent, but you should know. We had to let go 3 of the night cleaning staff. Immigration status issues. We've brought in replacements through the usual agency." Ronan ended the call without responding. He set the phone down and finally reached for the bourbon, taking a slow sip as he processed information that should have meant nothing. Staff turnover was a routine matter, handled by people he paid specifically so he wouldn't have to think about things like who scrubbed his floors or changed his sheets. But something nagged at him, a detail out of place, a note that didn't harmonize with the rest of the symphony he conducted with such careful control. He walked through the east wing of the mansion, past oil paintings that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, past antique furniture arranged by designers who understood that power wasn't just about having wealth, but displaying it with taste that separated old money from the nouveau riche trying desperately to buy class. The house was quiet at this hour, past midnight, when even his security team moved with the muted efficiency of ghosts. Ronan preferred it this way. He'd grown up in chaos, in cramped apartments where thin walls meant you heard every fight, every moment of desperation from the families packed together in buildings that smelled like mold and defeat. Now, silence was a luxury he'd earned through years of calculated violence and strategic ruthlessness. He rounded the corner toward the kitchen and stopped. A woman stood at the industrial sink, her back to him, scrubbing a pan with the methodical movements of someone lost in thought. She wore the standard gray uniform of the cleaning staff, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. From this angle, she was just another employee, another interchangeable person moving through his world without making an impression. Then she turned. For a moment, just a fraction of a second, Ronan's carefully constructed composure cracked, not visibly. No one watching would have seen anything except a powerful man observing his staff. But inside, something shifted, like tectonic plates grinding against each other deep beneath the surface. She was young, maybe 25, with the kind of exhausted beauty that came from sleepless nights and stress that aged you from the inside out. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her skin had the pale, translucent quality of someone who didn't see enough sunlight. But it was her wrist that caught his attention, the bruises circling the delicate bone like a cruel bracelet, dark purple fading to sickly yellow at the edges. She saw him and immediately lowered her gaze, her shoulders tensing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vale. I was just finishing up. I'll be out of your way." Her voice was soft, carefully neutral, the voice of someone who'd learned to make themselves invisible. She turned back to the sink, moving faster now, her hands trembling slightly as she rinsed the pan. But when she reached up to place it on the drying rack, her sleeve rode up, and Ronan saw it. A small scar above her left eyebrow, shaped like a crescent moon. The world tilted. He knew that scar. He'd been there when she got it, 20 years ago, in a different life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. "What's your name?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. She flinched at the sound, but didn't turn around. "Elara, sir. Elara Quinn." Quinn. Not her real last name. He knew that with absolute certainty. But the first name she couldn't change, couldn't hide from, because it was as much a part of her as that scar she probably didn't remember getting. Ronan took a step closer. "Look at me." She turned slowly, reluctantly, keeping her eyes downcast. This close, he could see the slight swell of her abdomen beneath the loose uniform. 6 months along, maybe 7. And he could see other things too, the way she held herself like someone braced for impact, the careful blankness of her expression that came from practice, from survival. "How long have you been working here?" he asked. 3 weeks, sir." 3 weeks. She'd been in his house for 3 weeks, and he hadn't known, hadn't seen her. But then that was the point of people in her position, wasn't it? To be invisible, to move through the spaces of wealth and power without leaving traces, without demanding attention. "Who hired you?" "The agency, sir. Prestige Staffing Solutions." Her hands twisted together in front of her, and he saw her wince as her fingers pressed against the bruised wrist. Ronan's mind was already moving, already calculating. Marcus would have run standard background checks. Nothing deep, just enough to ensure she wasn't a threat, wasn't someone with a criminal record or connections to rival organizations. A pregnant woman desperate enough to work a graveyard shift scrubbing rich people's kitchens wouldn't have triggered any alarms. "Those bruises," he said quietly. "How did you get them?" Elara's whole body went rigid. "I'm clumsy, sir. I fell." Lies. He knew lies the way a shark knew blood in the water, instantly, instinctively, but he also knew when to push and when to circle, when direct confrontation would get him what he wanted, and when patience served him better. "Go home," he said. "Your shift is over." Relief and confusion warred on her face. "But I still have 2 hours." "I said go home." She nodded quickly, grabbing her coat from a hook near the service entrance. As she hurried past him, Ronan caught the faint scent of cheap soap, and underneath it, something he remembered from a lifetime ago. The particular smell of fear mixed with stubborn defiance. The scent of someone who'd learned that survival meant never letting them see you break. The door closed behind her, and Ronan stood alone in the kitchen, his mind racing back 20 years to a different version of himself. He'd been 8 years old, small for his age, with secondhand clothes that never quite fit, and a name that meant nothing to anyone. His mother worked 3 jobs trying to keep them fed, and his father had made his choice when he walked out and never looked back. The Holloway Street Elementary Playground was a concrete wasteland where hierarchy was established with fists and cruelty, where being poor meant being prey. Ronan had learned early to keep his head down, to avoid the bigger kids who enjoyed making examples out of the weak. But one day, he'd made a mistake. He'd brought a sandwich to school, just a simple peanut butter sandwich his mother had made before leaving for her morning shift. He'd been eating it quietly on a bench in the corner when Derek Moss and his crew spotted him. "What's that, Vale?" Derek was 12, held back twice, big enough and mean enough to rule the playground like a tyrant. "Looks good. Why don't you share?" Ronan knew better than to argue. He held out the sandwich, already calculating how he'd make it through the rest of the day on an empty stomach. Derek took it, examined it with exaggerated interest, then dropped it on the ground and stepped on it. "Oops, guess you're not hungry after all." The other kids laughed. Ronan felt his face burn, but he stayed quiet, stayed still, because fighting back only made it worse. Then a voice cut through the laughter. "Pick it up." Everyone turned. A girl stood a few feet away, maybe 9 years old, with dark hair pulled back from a face that was all sharp angles and fierce eyes. Ronan had seen her around. She was new, had transferred in a few weeks ago, lived in one of the apartments even worse than his. Derek laughed. "What did you say?" "I said pick it up." She walked closer, and Ronan noticed she was trembling, but her voice stayed steady. "You're twice his size. You want to feel tough. Try someone who can fight back." "You?" Derek's smile turned mean. "You want to be his girlfriend? Want to protect him?" "I want you to stop being a coward." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "But I guess that's too much to ask." The punch came fast. Derek didn't waste time on warnings, but the girl was faster. She ducked, came up swinging, and caught him right in the nose. Blood sprayed, and Derek staggered back, more shocked than hurt. What happened next was chaos. Derek's friends jumped in, and the girl fought like a wild thing, all elbows and knees and absolute fury. She was outnumbered, outweighed, and Ronan knew she was going to lose. That's when he made a choice. He picked up a rock and threw it, hitting one of Derek's friends in the shoulder. Then he rushed forward, small and scared, but moving anyway, because this stranger had stood up for him, and he wouldn't let her stand alone. They lost the fight. Of course they did, but they lost together, and when the teachers finally pulled everyone apart, when they sat in the principal's office with matching bloody noses, and the girl had a cut above her eyebrow that would leave a crescent-shaped scar, Ronan felt something he'd never felt before. Someone had his back. The girl's name was Elara Reeves. They became inseparable after that, two kids with nothing and no one, finding safety in alliance. They watched each other's backs, shared whatever food they had, studied together in the library because it was warmer than either of their apartments. "When we grow up," Elara had told him once, sitting on the fire escape of her building with stolen cookies between them, "we're going to be different. We're going to have enough, you know? Enough money, enough food, enough everything." "How?" Ronan had asked. She'd smiled, fearless and certain. "We'll figure it out. We're smart, and we've got each other." 3 years later, she was gone. Her mother had taken her in the middle of the night, running from a boyfriend whose violence had finally crossed lines even their desperate neighborhood couldn't ignore. No goodbye, no forwarding address, just an empty apartment and a hole in Ronan's life that never quite closed. He'd looked for her. For years, he'd looked. But Elara Reeves had vanished like she'd never existed. And eventually, Ronan had learned to bury that part of himself. The boy who believed in friendship, in loyalty, in anything beyond power and survival. Now, standing in his kitchen at midnight, Ronan pulled out his phone and made a call. Marcus answered on the second ring. "Boss?" "The new cleaning staff member, Elara Quinn. I want everything. Real name, background, where she came from, who she's running from. I want it in 2 hours." "Sir, it's after midnight. 2 hours, Marcus. Or I'll find someone who can deliver what I ask for without excuses." He ended the call and moved to the window, watching rain hammer against the glass. Somewhere out there, Elara was heading back to whatever cheap room she'd rented, carrying a child and running from someone who'd put those bruises on her wrist. She didn't recognize him. Why would she? The skinny, scared kid she'd defended was gone, buried under 20 years of calculated transformation. Ronan Vale was a name that made people nervous now, a man who controlled territory and moved money and solved problems with precision that left no room for mercy. But he remembered her. Remembered the girl who'd stood up to bullies twice her size, who'd shared her last cookie, who'd promised they'd figure it out together. She was pregnant, terrified, hiding in his house under a fake name. Someone had hurt her. Someone had put fear in the eyes of the only person who'd ever stood beside him when he had nothing. Ronan's reflection stared back at him from the rain-streaked window. Cold eyes, expensive suit, the face of a man who'd learned that power came from the willingness to do what others wouldn't. He'd spent 20 years building an empire on ruthlessness and calculated violence. He'd made enemies regret their choices and allies understand that loyalty was the only currency that mattered. He'd become exactly what he needed to be to survive and thrive in a world that crushed people like the children they'd been. And now, one of the most powerful men in New York had just discovered the only person he'd ever truly cared about was in danger. 2 hours later, Marcus called back. "Her real name is Elara Reeves," he said. "Birth records match. She grew up in Brooklyn, disappeared from the system for about 15 years, resurfaced 6 months ago in Newark under the name Elara Quinn. No criminal record, no red flags, just nothing. Like she's been a ghost. What else? She's 7 months pregnant. Father of the baby is listed on medical records as Trent Mercer, address in Newark. I ran him. He's got a file. 2 domestic violence complaints, both dropped. 1 assault charge that got pled down. Works construction, drinks heavy, has connections to some small-time crews moving stolen goods through the port." Ronan's hand tightened on the phone. "Current status?" "That's where it gets interesting. Mercer filed a missing persons report 3 weeks ago. Says his pregnant girlfriend disappeared, took money from their apartment. He's worried about her safety. Marcus paused. The timing matches when Ilara showed up at your house. So she ran. Looks that way. And if Mercer's actively looking... Marcus didn't need to finish the sentence. Ronan stood in his study, processing information that rearranged everything he thought he knew about the quiet, frightened woman scrubbing his kitchen floors. She'd found him. Somehow, across all the years and changes and distance, Ilara had found her way into his house. Maybe it was coincidence, just random chance that placed her with an agency that serviced his estate. Maybe it was desperation, taking any job that came, not knowing or caring whose floors she'd scrub as long as she was far from the man who'd hurt her. Or maybe on some level she didn't even consciously recognize she'd been looking for the boy who'd fought beside her all those years ago. Boss? Marcus's voice brought him back. What do you want me to do? Ronan looked at the clock. 3 a.m. Ilara would be asleep, or trying to sleep, in whatever cramped room she'd found, one hand probably resting protectively on her swollen belly, ears tuned for any sound that might signal danger. Change her assignment, he said. Day shift, light duties only. And I want a full security assessment on her current living situation. Don't approach her directly. Just eyes on her building, neighbors, anyone who might be asking questions. Understood. Anything else? Find out everything about Trent Mercer. Where he goes, who he talks to, what he does with his time. I want to know before he sneezes. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Boss, are you sure you want to get involved in this? Domestic situations can get complicated. Did I ask for your opinion? No, sir. Then do what I'm paying you to do. Ronan ended the call and poured himself another bourbon. The rain had stopped, leaving the world outside clean and new, washed of all the dirt and grime that accumulated in the dark. But some stains didn't wash away so easily. He thought about Ilara at 25, pregnant and alone, wearing bruises like jewelry, living with the kind of fear that made you flinch at raised voices and unexpected movements. He thought about the girl she'd been, fierce and fearless and so certain they'd figure it out together. Life had taken that girl and broken her, shaped her into someone who worked graveyard shifts and hid from the father of her child and probably hadn't felt safe in months. Ronan knew about transformation. He'd spent his entire adult life carefully constructing the man he'd become, burying the frightened boy under layers of power and money and the kind of reputation that made grown men step aside when he entered a room. But some things, some people, couldn't be buried deep enough. The door to his study opened and Catherine Shaw walked in with a tablet and the brisk efficiency of a woman who'd learned that Ronan's time was measured in money most people couldn't imagine. She'd been his personal assistant for 5 years, handled everything from his legitimate business interests to the meetings that never appeared on any official calendar. You're up early, she said, setting the tablet on his desk. Or late. I can never tell with you. What do I have today? Conference call with the Shanghai investors at 8. Lunch meeting with Senator Morrison. He wants to discuss the waterfront development project. And you're supposed to attend that charity gala tonight, the one for inner-city youth programs. Ronan had forgotten about the gala. He attended these events because they served a purpose, maintaining the image of a legitimate businessman who cared about community development, making connections with politicians and other power brokers, keeping his public face clean while his private operations ran beneath the surface. Cancel it, he said. Catherine raised an eyebrow. You've already canceled twice. People are starting to talk. Let them talk. Ronan. She used his first name, which meant she was about to say something he wouldn't like. You've spent 10 years building your reputation as someone who supports legitimate causes. That's worth something. It's worth showing up to a party you don't want to attend. She was right, and he knew it. Public perception was a game he played better than most, understanding that power wasn't just about what you could do, but what people believed you might do. A crime boss was one thing, dangerous but predictable. A businessman with connections to both the underworld and the legitimate political structure was something else entirely, something more useful and more protected. Fine, he said. I'll go. 2 hours, then I'm leaving. Catherine smiled. I'll have your tux ready. After she left, Ronan stood at the window and watched the sun rise over his estate. Somewhere in the city, Ilara was waking up, getting ready for a shift she didn't know had been changed, probably calculating how many more weeks she could work before the pregnancy made it impossible, how much money she needed to save before the baby came. She was planning her survival with the same careful strategy he used to plan his business moves. She just had fewer resources, fewer options, and an enemy who wouldn't stop looking until he found what he'd lost. But she had something else now, something she didn't even know about yet. She had him. And Ronan Vale took care of what belonged to him, even if the person in question didn't remember that she'd belonged to him first, back when they were just two scared kids who'd promised to figure it out together. He picked up his phone and made another call. "Dr. Yates?" A sleepy voice answered. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" "I need a favor," Ronan said. "I'm sending you a patient. Pregnant, about 7 months, high-stress situation. I want full prenatal care, no questions asked, bills sent directly to me." Dr. Sarah Yates had been on Ronan's payroll for 6 years, providing medical care to people who couldn't or wouldn't go through normal channels. She was discreet, competent, and expensive enough that money bought her silence on matters that would make most doctors uncomfortable. "Who is she?" Dr. Yates asked. "Someone who needs help." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting. Can you do it or not?" He heard her sigh. "Send me her information. I'll make room in my schedule." The pieces were falling into place: security, medical care, a job that wouldn't exhaust her, protection she didn't know she needed yet. Ronan moved through his morning with mechanical efficiency, making calls, handling business, attending meetings where millions of dollars changed hands based on his decisions. But his mind kept circling back to a pregnant woman scrubbing floors at midnight, to bruises shaped like fingerprints, to a girl who'd thrown punches at bullies twice her size and promised they'd always have each other's backs. That afternoon, he returned to the estate early and found Marcus in the security office, surrounded by monitors showing every angle of the property. "Update," Ronan said. Marcus pulled up a file on his screen. "Alara's living in a studio apartment in a building off Riverside. The neighborhood's rough. 2 assaults in the past month, drug activity 3 blocks over. The building itself has minimal security, just a broken lock on the main entrance. She's on the 4th floor, no elevator." Ronan's jaw tightened. 4 flights of stairs, 7 months pregnant, in a building where broken locks meant anyone could walk in. "Keep watching," he said, "and get me the building owner's information." "Boss, if you're thinking about buying..." "I'm not thinking, I'm doing. Find out what it takes." Over the next week, Ronan moved pieces on a chessboard Alara didn't know existed. The building owner received an offer he'd be stupid to refuse, double market value for a property that was barely holding together. Cash payment, deal closed in 72 hours. Ronan became a landlord, and his first order of business was upgrading security, fixing the elevator, making sure his newest tenant had a building that wouldn't collapse around her. He reassigned her to day shift with explicit instructions that she was only to handle light cleaning, dusting, basic organization, nothing that required bending or lifting. When the household manager questioned the special treatment, Ronan's look was enough to end the conversation. And through it all, he watched. He saw how Alara arrived exactly on time, never a minute late, how she worked with quiet efficiency and never complained. He saw how she ate lunch alone in the staff room, usually just a sandwich and fruit, reading library books she carried in a worn canvas bag. He saw how she flinched when people moved too quickly near her, how she chose seats with her back to the wall, how her hands unconsciously moved to protect her belly whenever voices rose. She was living in survival mode, every action calculated to minimize risk, to stay invisible, to not draw attention that might bring danger back to her door. And she still hadn't recognized him. Why would she? The powerful man who owned this estate bore no resemblance to the scared 8-year-old boy she'd defended. 20 years and what felt like several lifetimes separated them now. His transformation complete, hers interrupted by circumstances that had taught her to hide instead of fight. But Ronan remembered everything. He remembered shared cookies on a fire escape, remembered promises made by children who believed they could outrun poverty and violence through sheer determination. He remembered the way she'd stood up to Derek Moss with blood on her face and absolute fury in her eyes. That girl was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of fear and exhaustion. And Ronan was going to make sure she survived long enough to find herself again, even if it meant going to war with the man who'd put those bruises on her wrist. even if it meant crossing lines he'd carefully maintained between his business and his personal life. Even if Alara never remembered that the boy she'd saved had grown up to become the most dangerous man in New York, and that he'd been waiting 20 years to return the favor. The shift change happened on a Tuesday morning, and Alara didn't question it because people in her position learned not to question good fortune that might evaporate if examined too closely. The household manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Chen, who ran the Vale estate with military precision, simply informed her that she'd been moved to day shift effective immediately, light duties only, and that her hourly rate would remain the same. Alara had nodded, murmured her thanks, and spent the entire bus ride home trying to figure out what she'd done wrong. Because in her experience, sudden changes meant someone had noticed you, and being noticed was dangerous. But as days passed and nothing terrible happened, no termination, no confrontation, just easier work during sunlit hours, she allowed herself to believe maybe this was just luck, the kind that came so rarely she'd almost forgotten it existed. She didn't know that Ronan watched her from his study window each morning, tracking her arrival with the same attention he gave to multi-million-dollar deals. She didn't know that every aspect of her employment had been carefully orchestrated, that the building she lived in now belonged to the man whose floors she cleaned, or that a security team shadowed her movements without ever letting her see them. She only knew that for the first time in months, she could sleep at night without working until her body ached, could eat lunch without feeling like she might collapse, could read her library books in natural light instead of the fluorescent glare of midnight. Small mercies, she thought. Small pieces of grace in a life that had taught her to expect nothing but hardship. On Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after the shift change, Alara was dusting the library, a massive room lined floor to ceiling with books that probably cost more than she'd earn in a lifetime, when Ronan walked in. She immediately stepped back, lowering her gaze. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vale. I'll come back later." "Stay." His voice was quiet but absolute, the kind of command that didn't require volume to enforce compliance. "I need to speak with you." Her heart kicked against her ribs. This was it then. Whatever temporary reprieve she'd been granted was over. She'd be fired, questioned, exposed. Her hands moved instinctively to her belly, a protective gesture she couldn't control. Ronan noticed. He noticed everything about her, the way she held herself like prey waiting for the predator to strike, the exhaustion that no amount of easier shifts could fully erase, the worn shoes she wore because better ones weren't in the budget. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs near the fireplace. "Sir, I shouldn't—" It wasn't a request. Alara sat perching on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment. Ronan remained standing, and she was struck by how different he seemed in this space. Not just powerful, but present in a way that made the huge room feel smaller, the air feel thicker. "How are you feeling?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. Fine, sir. Thank you for asking. You're 7 months pregnant, working a job that requires you to be on your feet for 8 hours. I doubt you're fine." He moved closer, and she resisted the urge to flinch. "When's the last time you saw a doctor?" Alara's mind raced. This was personal territory, dangerous ground. "I have an appointment scheduled at the clinic," she lied. The truth was she'd been rationing her savings, trying to make it stretch to cover rent and food and the minimum prenatal care, knowing that when the baby came, she'd need money for things she couldn't even afford to think about yet. Ronan pulled a card from his pocket and held it out. "Dr. Sarah Yates. She's expecting your call. Full prenatal care, everything you need. The bills come to me." Alara stared at the card like it might bite her. "I can't accept that." "Why not?" "Because I don't know what you want in return." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with the kind of suspicion that came from experience, from knowing that nothing was ever truly free. Something flickered across Ronan's face, not anger, but something harder to define. "I want you and your baby to be healthy. That's all." Nobody does something like this for nothing. Alara's hands trembled, but she kept talking because silence felt more dangerous than honesty. "I'm nobody. I clean your house. Why would you care if I see a doctor or not?" Ronan was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an intensity that made her feel transparent, like he could see through all the lies and fake names and careful distance she'd built around herself. "You remind me of someone," he finally said. "Someone who helped me a long time ago when I had nothing." "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You just need to take care of yourself. He set the card on the table beside her chair. Dr. Yates is discreet. Whatever situation you're in, whatever you're running from, it stays confidential. But you need prenatal care, and you need it now. Alara looked at the card, then at Ronan, trying to reconcile the crime boss whose name people whispered with fear, with this man who somehow knew she was running, who was offering help that felt too good to be real. The bruises on your wrist, Ronan said quietly. They're fading, but I've seen enough to know what they mean. Whoever put them there, he's not going to find you here. Her breath caught. How did you... Because I know what it looks like when someone's living in fear. He crouched down so they were eye level, and Alara finally looked directly at him. His eyes were gray, cold and clear as winter ice, but something in them reminded her of something, a memory she couldn't quite catch. I have resources, security, money, protection. And right now you need all of those things. I don't want to owe anyone, Alara whispered. Then don't think of it as debt. Think of it as someone paying forward a kindness they once received. She wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard to preserve. But she was tired, so desperately tired, and the baby moved inside her, a flutter of movement that reminded her this wasn't just about her anymore. She had someone else to protect, someone who deserved better than a mother too proud or too scared to accept help when it was offered. Okay, she said. I'll call her. Ronan stood, and for just a moment, his hand moved like he might touch her shoulder, offer some gesture of comfort. But he stopped himself, maintaining the distance between employer and employee, between the powerful and the powerless. There's something else, he said. Your apartment building. The security is inadequate. I'm having improvements made, new locks, cameras, better lighting, and the elevator is being repaired. Alara's eyes widened. You own my building? As of last week, consider it a coincidence. But there were no coincidences in Ronan Vale's world, and they both knew it. Everything he did was calculated, strategic, designed to achieve specific outcomes. The question was what outcome he was engineering now, and why she'd become part of his plans. I should get back to work, Alara said, standing carefully. The baby was getting big enough that sudden movements made her awkward, off balance. Take the rest of the day off, paid. Call Dr. Yates, make an appointment. Ronan walked to the door, then paused. And Alara, if anyone comes around asking questions about you, if anyone makes you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately. Understood? She nodded, not trusting her voice. After he left, Alara sat alone in the library, surrounded by books worth fortunes, holding a business card that represented medical care she desperately needed, trying to understand why a man like Ronan Vale would care about a pregnant maid with a fake name and a past she couldn't outrun. She didn't know that upstairs, Ronan was making another call. Marcus, I want eyes on Trent Mercer 24/7. If he so much as looks at a map of New York, I want to know about it. Boss, he's been quiet. No movement toward the city, no indication he knows where she is. Yet, Ronan's voice was ice. He doesn't know yet, but men like him don't let go easily. He'll come looking eventually, and when he does, I want to be ready. That evening, Alara called Dr. Yates from her apartment, still half convinced this was some elaborate mistake that would be corrected the moment she gave her name. But the receptionist was expecting her call, had an appointment available the next morning, and spoke with the kind of professional warmth that came from working with patients who had money and resources. The appointment itself was surreal. The office was in Manhattan, in a building with marble floors and artwork that probably cost more than Alara's entire life savings. Doctor Yates was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and gentle hands who asked questions without judgment and performed an ultrasound that showed Alara her daughter for the first time in months. She's healthy, Dr. Yates said, pointing to the screen where a tiny heartbeat with perfect rhythm. Strong heartbeat, good size, positioned well. You're doing better than you think. Alara couldn't speak past the lump in her throat. She'd been so afraid the stress had hurt her baby, afraid her inadequate diet and long work hours had caused damage she couldn't fix. But here was proof that despite everything, despite her failures and fear, this little girl was fighting to survive just like her mother. How are you feeling? Dr. Yates asked. Any pain, bleeding, unusual symptoms? Tired, Alara admitted, but I think that's normal. It is. But you're also under significant stress, and that's not good for either of you. Dr. Yates made notes in her chart. I'm going to recommend you start taking it easier. No heavy lifting, adequate rest, proper nutrition. I'm writing you a prescription for prenatal vitamins, and I want to see you back here in 2 weeks. I can't afford. Mr. Vale has already handled the financial arrangements. Your job is to take care of yourself and that baby. Let him worry about the bills. It should have felt wrong, accepting this level of help from a man she barely knew. But Alara was beyond pride, beyond the luxury of refusing assistance because it came with questions she couldn't answer. She took the prescriptions, scheduled the follow-up appointment, and left the office feeling something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. 3 days later, she was organizing books in the estate library when she found herself alone with Ronan again. This time she was ready, or thought she was, but he surprised her by asking a question she wasn't prepared for. The father of your baby. What's his name? Alara's hand stilled on the spine of a leather-bound first edition. Why do you want to know? Because I need to understand what kind of threat he represents. She turned to face him, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the Vale estate, she let him see past the careful mask of polite employee. His name is Trent Mercer. And he's the kind of man who thinks love means ownership, who believes apologies erase bruises, who promised he'd change and then proved that some people are exactly who they show you they are the first time. The words came out hard and bitter, carved from months of fear and regret. Ronan listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. How did you meet him? He asked. At a diner where I was waitressing. He was charming at first, brought me flowers, said nice things, made me feel like maybe I could have something normal. Alara laughed, but there was no humor in it. I should have known better. My mother spent my whole childhood picking men who hurt her. I swore I'd never be that stupid, but I guess some patterns are harder to break than others. When did it change? About 2 months into the relationship. Little things at first, checking my phone, asking where I'd been, who I'd talked to, then bigger things. Yelling, grabbing my arm hard enough to leave marks, punching walls when he got angry. She touched her wrist unconsciously. By the time I found out I was pregnant, I was already trapped. No money, no family, nowhere to go. He was so happy about the baby at first. Said it meant we were a real family now. Then the controlling got worse. What happened 3 weeks ago? Ronan's voice was quiet, but underneath it ran something cold and dangerous. Alara met his eyes. He came home drunk, started yelling about dinner not being ready. I talked back, actually defended myself for once, and he grabbed me, shook me hard enough that I thought. She pressed a hand to her belly. I thought he might hurt her, and I realized that if I stayed, he would. Maybe not that day, but eventually. Men like Trent always escalate. So you ran. I took $300 from his wallet while he was passed out, packed one bag, and got on a bus to New York. Changed my name, found work through an agency, and tried to disappear. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But I know he's looking for me. Trent doesn't let go of things he thinks belong to him. And in his mind, I'm his. The baby is his. He'll keep searching until he finds us. Ronan was silent for a long moment, processing information that confirmed what Marcus had already discovered, but hearing it in Alara's own words made it real in a different way. She'd been running not from abstract danger, but from a specific man with a specific history of violence, a man who believed he owned her body and the life growing inside it. He won't find you, Ronan said. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. He moved closer, and Alara saw something in his face that made her breath catch. Absolute certainty, the kind of conviction that came from power and the willingness to use it without hesitation. I have resources Trent Mercer can't imagine. Security he can't penetrate. And if he somehow manages to get close, he'll learn very quickly that some people shouldn't be touched. Why are you doing this? Alara asked. Really? Because I reminded you of someone isn't enough of a reason to go to war with a man you've never met. Ronan studied her face, and for a moment she thought she saw recognition flash in his eyes, like he was looking at someone he knew, someone he'd been searching for. Maybe it is, he said quietly. Maybe some debts are worth paying even 20 years later. Before she could ask what he meant, his phone rang. He answered it, listened for a moment, and his expression hardened into something that made Alara take an instinctive step back. Where? He asked. Then, keep him there. I'm on my way. He ended the call and looked at Alara. Stay here. Don't leave the estate. I'll explain later. What's happening? Nothing you need to worry about. But his voice said otherwise. Said this was exactly something to worry about. Something dangerous enough that he was already moving toward the door with the kind of focused intensity that came before violence. Ronan found Marcus in the security office, surrounded by monitors showing various angles of a bar in Queens where Trent Mercer was currently drinking himself toward a decision that would determine whether he lived or died. He's been there for 3 hours, Marcus said, asking questions about staffing agencies, showing people a photo on his phone. My guy says he's asking about pregnant women, recent hires, anyone matching Alara's description. Ronan watched the monitor. Trent was a big man, the kind who used size to intimidate, with the particular arrogance that came from never facing real consequences for his actions. He wore work boots and a flannel shirt, and even through the grainy security footage, Ronan could see the aggressive set of his shoulders, the way other people moved out of his space. He's getting close, Marcus said. 3 more agencies to check, and one of them is Prestige Staffing. When he gets there, when he asks the right questions, he won't. Ronan's voice was flat, final. Get me an address, work, home, wherever he'll be alone. Boss, if you're thinking about handling this personally, I'm not thinking, I'm doing. Ronan turned from the monitor. This is the man who put bruises on her wrists, who made her so afraid she ran across state lines with $300 and a fake name. He's hunting her right now, and when he finds her, he won't just take her back. He'll punish her for leaving, for daring to think she could escape. Marcus had worked for Ronan long enough to recognize the tone, the cold precision that came before someone stopped being a problem. You want him gone. I want him neutralized. Legally if possible, permanently if necessary. Ronan pulled out his phone. Get me everything, his schedule, his habits, his weaknesses. I want to know every place he's vulnerable. Over the next 48 hours, Ronan learned more about Trent Mercer than the man probably knew about himself. He learned that Trent drank at McGinty's pub every Friday, that he owed money to a bookie named Sal Russo, that his construction company was 3 months behind on payments to suppliers, that he had a temper that had gotten him fired from 2 previous jobs. He learned that Trent talked about Alara like she was property he'd misplaced, that he showed her picture to anyone who'd look, that he'd promised he'd find her and teach her what happened to women who thought they could just leave. And with each piece of information, Ronan's resolve hardened into something cold and immovable. On Saturday morning, he found Alara reading in the library again. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the question in her eyes, the fear that whatever threat had pulled him away so urgently had circled back to her. We need to talk, Ronan said. She closed her book, and he noticed her hands were shaking. Is it Trent? He's in New York. He's been asking questions, showing your picture around. He's working his way through staffing agencies. Ronan sat across from her, maintaining distance because getting too close felt dangerous for reasons he didn't want to examine. He's going to find the connection eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not this week, but he will. Alara's face went pale. I need to leave. Find somewhere else. Change my name again. No. The word came out harder than he intended. Running isn't the solution. You can't spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, moving every time he gets close. That's not living. That's just surviving, and you deserve better than that. What choice do I have? You let me handle it. She laughed, a sharp, broken sound. Handle it how? You can't just make him disappear. He has friends, family, people who'd notice if something happened to him. I'm not going to kill him, Ronan said, though the thought had crossed his mind more than once. But I'm going to make sure he understands that you're protected, that coming after you means going through me, and that's a fight he can't win. You don't know Trent. He doesn't care about fights he can't win. He only cares about control, about making sure I know he owns me. Then it's time he learned he's wrong. Ronan leaned forward. I need you to trust me, just for a little while. Can you do that? Alara looked at him, really looked, and Ronan wondered if somewhere in her memory, buried under years and fear and everything that had happened since childhood, she recognized him. Recognized the boy who'd fought beside her even though he was scared, who'd thrown rocks at bigger kids and taken punches because she was worth defending. "I don't even know why you care," she whispered. "Maybe you will," Ronan said. "Someday. But right now, I need you to stay here, stay safe, and let me do what I do best." Which is? Solving problems that other people can't solve. That night, Ronan went to McGinty's pub alone, without Marcus or security or any of the usual protections that came with his position. He found Trent Mercer at the bar, 3 beers deep and working on a 4th, exactly where the surveillance had said he'd be. Ronan slid onto the stool beside him and ordered a bourbon. Trent gave him a sideways look, the kind of automatic assessment men like him made of everyone, sizing up threats, calculating dominance. Ronan let him look, let him see the expensive suit and watch, the casual confidence of someone who belonged in much better places than this. "You lost?" Trent asked. His voice was rough, aggressive even in casual conversation. "Not at all," Ronan said. "I'm exactly where I need to be." They sat in silence for a moment, and then Ronan said, "I hear you're looking for someone. A woman." Trent's attention sharpened. "What do you know about it?" "I know you've been asking questions, showing her picture around, making threats about what you'll do when you find her." Ronan took a sip of his bourbon. "I'm here to tell you to stop." Trent laughed, ugly and mean. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who has a vested interest in making sure Alara Reeves stays unfound." The name hit Trent like a physical blow. He spun on his stool, suddenly alert, dangerous. "Where is she?" "You know where my girl is?" "She's not your girl anymore. She stopped being yours the moment you decided bruises were an acceptable form of communication." Trent's hand shot out, grabbing Ronan's collar. "You tell me where she is right now, or—" He didn't finish the threat because Ronan moved faster than a drunk man could track, breaking the grip and twisting Trent's arm behind his back with enough force to make him gasp. The whole bar went quiet, watching 2 men locked in a struggle that had gone from verbal to physical in seconds. "Listen carefully," Ronan said quietly, his mouth close to Trent's ear. "You're going to stop looking for Alara. You're going to forget you ever knew her. And you're going to hope I never have a reason to remember your name again." "Fuck you," Trent snarled. "That's my baby she's carrying. I have rights. You have nothing." Ronan released him with a shove. "You're a violent drunk who's 3 months behind on your business payments, who owes Sal Russo $12,000, who's one bad decision away from losing everything. I can make that happen. 1 phone call and your creditors all come due at once. 2 phone calls, and the police start looking into those domestic violence complaints that got dropped because you scared her into silence. 3 phone calls, and you disappear into problems you can't punch your way out of." Trent's face was red with rage and alcohol, but underneath it, Ronan saw the first flicker of fear. "You're threatening me?" "I'm promising you, stay away from Alara, stay away from that baby. Forget they exist, because if you don't, you'll learn that there are men in this world who make violence into an art form, and I'm one of them." Ronan stood, straightened his jacket, and dropped a $100 bill on the bar. For his drinks, and for his silence. He walked out while Trent was still processing what had happened, while the other patrons were still trying to decide if what they'd witnessed was worth remembering or better forgotten. Outside, Marcus was waiting with the car. "How'd it go?" he asked as Ronan slid into the back seat. "He knows I'm watching. Question is whether he's smart enough to back off or stupid enough to push." "And if he pushes?" Ronan looked out the window at the city streaming past, at the lights and shadows that hid 1,000 stories of people struggling to survive in a world that didn't care about their pain. "Then I stopped being nice," he said. Back at the estate, Alara couldn't sleep. She lay in her small apartment, one hand on her belly, feeling her daughter move and wondering what kind of future waited for them. She'd spent months running, hiding, trying to stay invisible. But Ronan Vale had seen her anyway, had looked past the fake name and the maid's uniform and decided she was worth protecting. She didn't understand why. Didn't understand what debt he thought he owed or who she'd reminded him of. But for the first time since she'd fled Newark with $300 and terror in her heart, she felt something that wasn't fear. She felt like maybe, just maybe, someone was finally on her side. And somewhere in the city, Trent Mercer sat in his empty apartment with a fresh bottle and a phone in his hand, trying to decide whether the man in the expensive suit had been bluffing or if he'd just been warned off by someone who actually could destroy him. He took a drink, looked at Alara's picture one more time, and felt rage and fear war inside him. The choice he made in the next few days would determine everything that came after, and Ronan Vale was ready for either option. The decision Trent made came faster than Ronan expected, delivered through Marcus at 6 in the morning 3 days after the encounter at McGinty's. "He's hired a private investigator," Marcus said, his voice tight through the phone. "Guy named Eddie Rourke used to be NYPD until he got bounced for taking payoffs. He's asking the same questions Trent was, but he's smarter about it, more systematic." Ronan stood at his bedroom window watching the sun rise over the estate, already calculating moves and countermoves. How long before Rourke connects the dots? Week, maybe 2? He's working through employment agencies, cross-referencing pregnant women hired in the last month against missing persons reports. It's only a matter of time before he hits prestige staffing, and when he does, he'll find her. Ronan's jaw tightened. Where's Rourke now? Working out of an office in Hell's Kitchen. He's careful, doesn't have obvious vulnerabilities we can exploit. And boss, there's something else. Trent's been talking, telling people you threatened him, that some rich guy is protecting his girlfriend, words spreading in certain circles. Which meant Ronan's protection of Alara was no longer a private matter. It was becoming known, talked about, analyzed by people who understood that powerful men didn't involve themselves in domestic disputes unless there was a reason that went deeper than casual charity. "I want a full workup on Rourke," Ronan said. "Every client, every case, every corner he's ever cut. And I want to know who Trent's been talking to." After ending the call, Ronan showered and dressed with mechanical precision, his mind already 3 steps ahead. The confrontation at the bar had been a warning shot, meant to make Trent back off through intimidation. Instead, it had escalated the situation, pushed Trent to spend money he didn't have on a PI who'd eventually find what he was looking for, which meant the clock was ticking, and Ronan needed to move faster. He found Alara in the estate kitchen having breakfast with the other day's staff, and the normalcy of the scene, people laughing, sharing coffee, talking about weekend plans, felt surreal against the backdrop of the threat closing in. She looked up when he entered, and he saw the question in her eyes, the constant low-level anxiety that never quite left her face. "My office," he said quietly. 5 minutes. The laughter died. Everyone understood that a summons from Ronan Vale wasn't a request but a command, and they watched Alara gather her things with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity. She followed him through the mansion in silence, and Ronan was aware of the picture they made. The crime boss and the pregnant maid, walking through halls worth millions while danger circled closer. In his office, he closed the door and gestured to a chair. Alara sat, her hands folded protectively over her belly, and Ronan noticed she'd gained a little weight in the past few weeks. The hollows under her eyes weren't quite as deep, and there was color in her cheeks that hadn't been there before. Dr. Yates's care was making a difference, giving her and the baby what they needed to be healthy. But health didn't matter if Trent found them first. "I need to tell you something," Ronan said, "and I need you to stay calm." Her hands tightened. "He knows where I am." "Not yet. But he's hired someone to find you, a private investigator who's good at his job. We have maybe 2 weeks before he makes the connection." The color drained from Alara's face. "I have to leave. Today. Right now." "No." Ronan moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. "Running isn't the answer anymore. You can't keep fleeing every time he gets close. Eventually you'll run out of places to hide, out of money to keep moving. And when that happens, when you're cornered and exhausted and the baby's here, what then?" "What choice do I have?" Her voice cracked. "Trent won't stop. He'll keep looking, keep pushing until he finds me. And when he does, he'll take my baby. He'll use her to control me, and I'll be right back where I started, only worse because now there's a child involved." "He won't take her." Ronan crouched down so they were eye level. "I won't let that happen." "You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that." "I can, and I am." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling. "I've been making calls, pulling strings. There are legal options we haven't explored yet. Restraining orders, custody protections, documentation of his violence. And if legal doesn't work, there are other ways to make someone disappear from your life without them actually disappearing. Alara looked at their joined hands, and something flickered across her face. Confusion, recognition, a feeling she couldn't quite name. Why does this matter so much to you? I'm nobody. Just a woman who made bad choices and ended up cleaning your floors. You're not nobody. The words came out rougher than Ronan intended, edged with emotion he usually kept buried deep. You're someone who stood up to bullies when you were 9 years old. Someone who threw punches at kids twice your size because you couldn't stand watching someone weaker get hurt. Someone who shared your last cookie and promised we'd figure it out together. The silence that followed was absolute. Alara stared at him, her mind racing, trying to connect dots that seemed impossible to connect. Then slowly, she lifted her free hand to his face, her fingers trembling as they traced the line of his jaw, moved up to the scar hidden in his hairline above his right temple, the scar he'd gotten when Derek Moss's friend had thrown him against a brick wall. "Ronan," she whispered. "Ronan Vale." "Hi, Alara." His voice was soft, almost gentle. "It's been a while." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "The boy from Holloway Street. The one who... We were going to figure it out together. You were going to..." She couldn't finish, couldn't reconcile the frightened 8-year-old who'd shared her fire escape with the man who controlled half of New York's criminal underworld. "I did figure it out," Ronan said. "Just maybe not the way we imagined back then." She pulled her hand back, shaking her head. "You're him. You're really him. I should have seen it, should have known. But you're so different. Everything about you is different." "Not everything. I still remember what it feels like to be powerless, to watch people get hurt and not be able to stop it, to run because fighting back wasn't an option." He stood, putting distance between them because the emotion in her eyes was too much, too raw. "I spent 20 years making sure I'd never be powerless again. And now that I have the power to protect the one person who protected me when it mattered most, you think I'm going to let some drunk construction worker take that from me?" Alara wiped her eyes, and when she looked at him again, he saw the girl she'd been, fierce and fearless and absolutely certain that right mattered more than might. "What happened to you, Ronan? How did you go from that scared kid to this?" "The same thing that happens to anyone who survives long enough in a world that doesn't care if you live or die. I learned to fight back. I learned that money meant power, that power meant control, and control meant nobody could hurt me ever again." He turned to the window. "After you disappeared, I looked for you. For years, but you'd vanished like you never existed. Eventually, I stopped looking and started building something that meant I'd never have to feel that helpless again." "So you became a criminal." "I became powerful. The criminality was just the most efficient path." Ronan glanced back at her. "And before you judge too harshly, ask yourself what you would have done. If you'd had the chance to climb out of poverty, to make yourself untouchable, would you have said no because the method wasn't pure?" Alara was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know. Maybe I would have. Maybe that's why I ended up with Trent, working minimum wage jobs, and running from a man who thinks love means ownership, because I never learned how to fight the way you did. You fought differently. You fought by surviving, by leaving when staying would have killed you, by protecting your daughter even when it meant losing everything else." Ronan moved back to the desk. "That takes a different kind of strength, the kind I'm not sure I have anymore." She stood, one hand supporting her back, and crossed to where he stood. They were close now, close enough that Ronan could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could count the faint freckles across her nose that had survived into adulthood. "I remember the cookies," she said softly. "Chocolate chip. I stole them from my mother's stash, and we ate them on the fire escape and talked about how someday we'd have enough of everything. You said we'd figure it out together. We were kids. We didn't know how hard it would be, how the world would grind us down and reshape us into people we wouldn't recognize." Her hand moved to his arm, tentative but deliberate. "But we're not kids anymore. And maybe we can still figure it out, just in a different way than we imagined." Before Ronan could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and felt his blood turn to ice. "What?" Alara asked. "What is it?" "Marcus just sent surveillance footage." He pulled up the video, and they watched together as Eddie Rourke walked into Prestige Staffing Solutions, badge in hand, that particular confident stride of someone who knew he was about to get answers. "That's the investigator," Ronan said. He's there right now. Elara's breathing quickened. They'll tell him. The agency will have my employment records, the address I gave them, everything. The address you gave them is fake. I had it checked when we ran your background. But even as he said it, Ronan knew it didn't matter. The agency would have other information, her physical description, her pregnancy, the date she was hired. It was enough for someone like Rourke to start connecting dots to figure out that the woman Trent was looking for was currently employed at the Vale estate. And once he had that information, once Trent knew where she was, all of Ronan's careful protection would be tested in ways he couldn't completely control. We need to move you, Ronan said, already planning. Somewhere secure, somewhere Trent can't reach, even if he knows you're under my protection. No. Elara's voice was steady, despite the fear in her eyes. I'm done running. You said it yourself. I can't keep fleeing every time he gets close. If he's coming, let him come. But this time, I don't face him alone. Elara, I spent months being afraid, Ronan. Months looking over my shoulder, flinching at shadows, living like prey, waiting for the predator to find me. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of letting Trent control my life, even from a distance. She straightened, and Ronan saw the girl who'd punched Derek Moss in the nose, the fierce defender who'd stood her ground when retreat would have been smarter. If we're going to end this, let's end it, but on our terms, not his. Ronan studied her, seeing past the pregnancy and the exhaustion to the core of steel that had survived everything life had thrown at her. She was right. Running would only delay the inevitable. Trent was the kind of man who saw retreat as victory, who'd chase her across the country if necessary, because giving up meant admitting she had the power to leave him. All right, Ronan said, we do it your way, but we do it smart, and we do it with every advantage I can give you. Over the next 2 days, Ronan mobilized resources that would have seemed impossible to anyone who didn't understand how deep his connections ran. He contacted lawyers who specialized in domestic violence cases, who knew how to build documentation that would hold up in court. He hired a different private investigator to compile evidence of Trent's history, the dropped charges, the witnesses who'd been too afraid to testify, the pattern of violence that marked him as a threat, and he made calls to people who operated in shadows, who understood that sometimes problems needed to be solved through channels that never appeared in official records. Meanwhile, Elara met with lawyers in conference rooms that smelled like old money and new power, answering questions about her relationship with Trent, with a directness that surprised even her. She showed them her medical records from Dr. Yates, the documentation of stress-related complications that threatened her pregnancy. She gave statements about the violence, the control, the fear that had defined her last year. We can get you a restraining order, one of the lawyers said. She was a woman in her 50s named Rebecca Chen, with sharp eyes and a reputation for destroying abusive men in court. But you need to understand, paper protection only works if the person you're protecting yourself from respects the law. From what you've told me, Trent Mercer doesn't. So what good is it? Elara asked. It establishes a legal record. When he violates it, and men like him always do, we have grounds for arrest, for prosecution, for putting him somewhere he can't hurt you. Rebecca leaned forward. But I'm going to be honest with you. The legal system moves slowly, and you're 7 months pregnant. We might not have time to build the kind of case that keeps him away permanently before your baby arrives. Ronan, who'd been sitting silently in the corner, spoke up. Then we need to make sure he doesn't get close enough to matter. Rebecca glanced at him, and something passed between them, an understanding that happened outside legal parameters, in the space where power and money and carefully applied pressure accomplished what courts could not. I'll file the paperwork today, she said. In the meantime, I suggest you stay somewhere with excellent security, somewhere Mr. Mercer would be foolish to approach. Which was how Elara found herself, 3 days later, being moved from her studio apartment to a guest suite in the Vale Estate's private wing. The room was bigger than her entire apartment, with windows overlooking gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain, furniture that belonged in museums, and a bathroom with a tub large enough to swim in. This is too much, she said as Ronan showed her around. It's practical. You're safer here than anywhere else, and I can't protect you if you're miles away in a building with broken locks. He opened the closet, revealing that someone had already stocked it with maternity clothes in her size. Mrs. Chen and Dr. Yates both agreed. The stress of commuting, of living in an unsafe building, it's not good for you or the baby. Alara ran her hand over a soft sweater that probably cost more than she made in a month. I feel like I'm taking advantage of you. You're not. You're letting me do what I should have done 20 years ago. Be there when it matters. Ronan moved to the door. There's a panic button by the bed, another in the bathroom. Security monitors the entire wing, and Marcus knows to contact me immediately if anything seems off. Ronan. She waited until he turned back. Thank you. For all of this. For remembering. For caring when you didn't have to. I always cared, he said quietly. I just didn't have the power to do anything about it until now. That night, Alara lay in a bed softer than clouds, one hand on her belly, staring at the ceiling and trying to process how drastically her life had changed in a matter of weeks. She'd gone from invisible maid to protected guest, from running alone to having resources she couldn't have imagined, from forgotten to remembered by someone who'd become powerful enough to reshape the world around him. Her daughter kicked, strong and insistent, and Alara whispered, "We're going to be okay. I promise. Uncle Ronan won't let anything happen to us." Uncle Ronan. The words felt right in a way that surprised her, creating a connection that went beyond employer and employee, beyond protector and protected, into something that felt almost like family. 2 floors down, Ronan sat in his study reviewing the evidence his investigators had compiled. Trent's history was worse than he'd initially thought. 3 women before Alara, all with similar stories of charm turning to control, turning to violence. One had ended up hospitalized, another had disappeared entirely, and nobody seemed to care enough to investigate why. Looking at the pattern, Ronan understood with absolute clarity that Trent wouldn't stop. Restraining orders, legal threats, even criminal charges. None of it would matter to a man who saw women as property and violence as his right. The only thing that would stop him was something permanent, something that removed his ability to hurt anyone ever again. Ronan had made his fortune understanding men like Trent, predicting their moves, staying 3 steps ahead. And right now, every instinct he'd developed told him that the confrontation was coming faster than any of them were ready for. His phone buzzed. Marcus. Rourke just filed his report with Trent. He knows Alara's at the estate. And boss, Trent's response wasn't what we expected. What did he do? He bought a gun. Glock 19, purchased legally this afternoon from a dealer in Newark. Then he booked a motel room in Queens, 2 miles from your estate. Ronan's hand tightened on the phone. He's coming. Looks that way. And boss, he's been drinking. Posts on social media, messages to friends. He's working himself up to something. Talking about his rights, about how nobody takes what belongs to him, how he's going to get his family back no matter what it takes. Which meant they were past the point of negotiation, past intimidation or legal maneuvering. Trent had made his choice, and it was the stupidest, most dangerous choice he could have made, coming to Ronan's territory, armed and angry, to take back a woman Ronan had claimed under his protection. It was suicide dressed up as determination. Increase security, Ronan said. I want men on every entrance, cameras watching every approach, and I want Alara's wing locked down tight. Nobody gets close without going through 3 layers of protection first. Already done. But Ronan, if he's desperate enough, if he's drunk enough, then we'll handle it. Ronan's voice was ice and iron. But he's not taking her. He's not even getting close. The next morning, Alara woke to find the estate transformed into something resembling a fortress. Security personnel moved through the grounds with tactical precision. Cameras had been installed in places she hadn't noticed before, and there was a tension in the air that made her stomach clench with understanding. She found Ronan in his study, and one look at his face told her everything she needed to know. He's here, she said, not a question. In the city. He knows where you are. Ronan stood, and she saw he'd been up all night, saw the exhaustion and determination warring in his expression. But knowing and reaching are 2 different things. I have 30 men between you and him, and he'd have to go through every one of them to get close. Alara moved to the window, looking out at grounds that seemed peaceful despite the danger circling. How did I not see it? How did I not see what he was before it was too late? Because men like Trent are good at hiding what they are until you're already trapped. They know the right words, the right gestures, how to make you believe the violence is an exception instead of the rule. Ronan came to stand beside her. It's not your fault, It was never your fault. I should have left sooner. You left when you could. That's all anyone can do. He turned to face her. Elara, I need you to understand something. If Trent gets past my security, if he somehow makes it into this house, I will stop him, permanently, if necessary. And I need to know that you're okay with that. She met his eyes, seeing in them the boy who'd fought beside her, and the man who'd learned to fight with tools that boy could never have imagined. I don't want anyone to die because of me. This isn't about you. This is about a man who's made a career of hurting women and thinking there'd never be consequences. If he dies, it's because he chose to come to my home, armed and dangerous, threatening someone under my protection. Ronan's voice was steady, absolute. I've killed people for less, Elara. I'll kill him without hesitation if it means keeping you and your baby safe. The casual way he said it, matter of fact without drama or bravado, made it more real than any theatrical declaration would have. This was who Ronan Vale was now. A man who understood that sometimes violence was the only answer that worked, who'd built his empire on the willingness to do what others wouldn't. Okay, Elara whispered. Okay. They stood together at the window, watching the sun climb higher, both of them knowing that somewhere in the city, Trent Mercer was drinking and planning and working himself toward a moment that would end everything one way or another. The waiting was the hardest part. Knowing danger was coming, but not knowing when, not knowing exactly how it would unfold. Elara spent the day in her room, trying to read, trying to rest, but jumping at every sound, every footstep in the hallway. And then, at 3 p.m, Marcus burst into Ronan's study. He's here. Trent's at the front gate, demanding to see Elara. He's got the gun, and he's not trying to hide it. Ronan was already moving. Keep him outside, lock down the house, and get Elara to the safe room. But before Marcus could respond, they heard it, a gunshot, loud and sharp, shattering the afternoon quiet. Trent Mercer had just declared war, and Ronan Vale was about to show him what happened when you threatened the wrong person's family. The gunshot echoed through the estate like a crack of thunder, and Ronan was already running before the sound finished reverberating off the stone walls. Marcus fell into step beside him, radio crackling with reports from security teams positioned throughout the grounds. Shot fired at the main gate. No casualties. Suspect is Trent Mercer, armed with a handgun, making verbal threats. He's demanding to see Elara Reeves, says he knows she's inside. Ronan's mind moved with cold precision even as his body surged with adrenaline. I want him contained but not engaged. Nobody fires unless he breaches the perimeter, and get Elara to the safe room now. But when they reached Elara's suite, they found her standing in the hallway with 2 security guards trying to convince her to move. Her face was pale, but her jaw was set with the same stubborn determination Ronan remembered from childhood. I'm not hiding, she said when she saw him. Not anymore. Elara, this isn't the time. He came here because of me, because I ran, because I dared to think I could escape. If I hide now, if I let you fight my battle while I cower in a safe room, then he's already won. Her hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. I need to face him. I need to look him in the eye and tell him he doesn't own me anymore. Ronan grabbed her shoulders, gentle but firm. He has a gun. He's drunk, he's angry, and he's already fired 1 shot. Facing him right now isn't brave, it's suicide. Then come with me. You said you'd protect me, so protect me while I do this. Elara's eyes blazed with something fierce and familiar. I spent a year letting him make me small, letting his violence shrink my world down to nothing but fear. I won't give him 1 more second of that power. Not 1. Marcus caught Ronan's eye, a silent question passing between them. This was tactically insane, putting the person they were trying to protect anywhere near the threat. But Ronan also understood what Elara needed. Not just safety, but agency, the chance to reclaim herself from the man who tried to break her. All right, Ronan said, but we do it my way. You stay behind me, you don't get close to him, and the second I say move, you move. Understood? She nodded, and together they made their way through the mansion toward the front of the estate. Through windows, Ronan could see security personnel taking positions, creating layers of protection between Trent and the house. The man himself was visible at the gate, pacing like a caged animal, the gun hanging loose in his right hand. Even from a distance, Ronan could see the signs, the unsteady gait, the aggressive posture, The particular recklessness that came from alcohol and rage mixing into something explosive. Trent was past the point of rational thought, operating on pure emotion and entitlement, convinced that the woman he'd terrorized owed him her presence, her submission, her life. They stopped at the front entrance, still 50 yards from the gate where Trent stood. Ronan positioned Alara slightly behind him, close enough to see but protected by his body, and the small army of security personnel who'd formed a human wall between them and danger. "Alara," Trent's voice carried across the distance, slurred and furious. "I know you're in there. I know you're hiding behind this rich bastard, playing victim, acting like I'm the monster. Come out here and talk to me." Alara stepped forward, but Ronan's arm shot out, stopping her. "Not yet. Let him burn himself out first." "You think you can just leave?" Trent continued, working himself into a frenzy. "Take my kid, disappear, shack up with some crime boss like I'm just supposed to forget you exist? That baby is mine. You're mine, and I'm not leaving here without what belongs to me." Marcus spoke quietly into his radio. "Police are en route, ETA 8 minutes. But boss, he's getting more agitated. This could go bad fast." Ronan knew it. He'd seen men like this before. Men who'd backed themselves into corners and decided that if they couldn't have what they wanted, they'd destroy it rather than let someone else claim it. Trent wasn't here to negotiate or reconcile. He was here to punish Alara for daring to choose herself over him. "I'm going to talk to him," Ronan said. "Bad idea," Marcus replied. "You get close, he's not going to shoot me. He wants Alara, and killing me doesn't get him that." Ronan looked at Alara. "Stay here. No matter what happens, you stay behind this line." Before she could argue, he walked forward with the casual confidence of someone who'd faced loaded guns before and survived. His security team moved with him, creating a protective formation, but Ronan waved them back. This conversation needed to happen between two men, one who thought violence made him powerful, and one who'd learned that real power came from knowing exactly when and how to use it. He stopped 10 feet from the gate, close enough to see the bloodshot eyes and trembling hands, the desperation poorly disguised as rage. "Mr. Mercer," Ronan said, his voice carrying clear and cold across the space between them. "You're trespassing on private property with a firearm. That's a felony. The police are already on their way. I'm giving you one chance to leave before this gets worse for you than it already is." Trent laughed, ugly and mean. "You think I care about cops? About your property? You stole my family. That's my girl in there, my baby she's carrying, and you think you can just keep them because you've got money and men with guns?" "I didn't steal anything. Alara made a choice to leave you. That's not theft. That's self-preservation." "She's confused. She's pregnant, emotional. She doesn't know what she wants." Trent raised the gun, not quite pointing it at Ronan, but making the threat clear. "I love her. I made mistakes. Yeah, but everyone does. She knows I'd never really hurt her." Ronan looked at the man in front of him and saw everything wrong with a world that let violence hide behind the word love, that let men like Trent convince themselves their abuse was passion, their control was care. "The bruises on her wrists say different," Ronan said quietly. "The medical records documenting stress complications from your violence say different. The fact that she ran across state lines with $300 rather than spend one more day with you says different. You don't know anything about us, about what we have. I know she's terrified of you. I know she flinches when people move too fast, that she couldn't sleep at night because she was always waiting for you to come through the door angry. I know you took someone bright and fierce and ground her down until she thought she deserved the way you treated her." Ronan's voice dropped, became something dangerous. "And I know that ends today." Trent's face flushed dark red. "Who the hell do you think you are? You think money makes you better than me? Makes you deserve her more? I think not hitting her makes me better than you. I think providing safety instead of fear makes me deserve her trust more than you ever did." Ronan took a step closer. "But this isn't about me or you. This is about a woman who decided she'd rather raise her child alone than stay with someone who hurt her, and you need to respect that choice." "Respect?" Trent spat the word like poison. "You want to talk about respect? I gave her everything. Roof over her head, food, protection. Protection from what? From you?" Ronan's laugh was cold. "You're not her protector, Mercer. You're her abuser, and the only thing she needs protection from is you." The words hit like physical blows. and Ronan saw Trent's face transform, rage overtaking whatever thin veneer of rationality he'd been clinging to. The gun came up, pointed directly at Ronan's chest. "Don't!" Marcus's voice carried from behind them, sharp and lethal. "You pull that trigger, and you're dead before you hit the ground." Trent's eyes flickered to the security team, all armed, all trained, all waiting for the slightest justification to eliminate the threat he represented. But drunk men with guns and wounded pride rarely made smart choices. "I just want to talk to her," Trent said, and now his voice cracked, emotion bleeding through the anger. "Just let me talk to her. Let me explain. Let me make this right." "No." Alara's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Everyone turned to see her stepping forward despite Ronan's orders, moving past the security line with her hand protectively on her swollen belly. Ronan started toward her, but she shook her head, her eyes locked on Trent. "Alara, get back," Ronan said. "It's okay." She stopped beside him, and Ronan positioned himself between her and the gun still pointed in their direction. "I need to do this." She looked at Trent, really looked at him, seen past the fear he'd instilled to the pathetic reality underneath, a man so insecure in himself that he needed to control another person just to feel powerful. "You want to talk?" Alara said. "Fine. Here's what I have to say. I don't love you. I'm not confused or emotional or making a mistake. I'm clear-headed and certain, and I'm telling you that what we had wasn't love. It was control and fear and violence dressed up with apologies and promises you never kept." "Baby, please." Trent lowered the gun slightly, his face contorting with something that might have been genuine anguish if it wasn't mixed with so much entitlement. "I can change, I swear. Just come back, give me another chance. I gave you chances, dozens of them. Every time you said sorry, every time you promised it wouldn't happen again, I believed you. I wanted to believe you because the alternative meant admitting I'd made a terrible mistake." Alara's voice grew stronger. "But you didn't change. You got worse. The control got tighter, the violence got more frequent, and I realized that if I stayed, you'd kill me. Maybe not intentionally, maybe just in one of your rages where you didn't mean to hit quite so hard. But I'd end up dead, and you'd probably convince yourself it was my fault for making you angry. I never meant to hurt you, but you did, over and over, and meaning to or not doesn't change the bruises, doesn't change the fear, doesn't change the fact that I spent a year walking on eggshells trying not to set you off." She touched her belly. "This baby deserves better than growing up watching her father hurt her mother. She deserves better than learning that love looks like violence, and I deserve better than spending the rest of my life afraid." Trent's hand tightened on the gun. "So that's it? You're just going to stay here with him? Let him raise my kid?" "This baby is mine," Alara said firmly. "Not yours. Mine. You gave up any claim to her the first time you put your hands on me in anger. And Ronan isn't trying to replace you. He's just making sure we're safe from you." "Safe?" Trent's voice rose. "You think you're safe with a criminal? With a man who kills people for a living? You're so scared of me, but you'll shack up with someone 10 times more dangerous?" "The difference," Alara said quietly, "is that Ronan has never made me afraid. He's given me protection, medical care, a place to live where I don't flinch every time I hear footsteps. You gave me bruises and nightmares and terror. So yeah, I'll take my chances with the criminal over the abuser any day." The truth of it, the simple, devastating truth, hung in the air between them. Ronan saw the moment it broke through Trent's defenses, saw the rage and pain and humiliation war across his features. Men like Trent couldn't handle rejection, couldn't process that the women they'd terrorized might choose anyone else over them. "You'll regret this," Trent said, raising the gun again. "You think you can just throw away what we had? Build a life with him? I'll make sure you regret it. Put the gun down." Ronan's voice was absolute zero. "Last warning." "Or what? You'll kill me?" Trent laughed wildly. "Go ahead. Do it. Prove you're the monster everyone says you are." "I don't need to prove anything. But if you threaten her one more time, if you don't lower that weapon right now, my men will put 3 bullets in you before you can blink." Ronan stepped fully in front of Alara. "Your choice. Live and walk away or die right here in front of the woman you claim to love." For a long moment, nothing moved. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see which path Trent would choose, reason or destruction, survival or suicide by security team. Then sirens split the air, growing closer. Police were almost here, and that changed the calculation. Trent looked at the gun in his hand, at Ronan standing like an immovable wall, at Alara behind him with her hand on her belly and no fear left in her eyes. "This isn't over," Trent said. "Yes, it is." Ronan's voice carried absolute finality. "You're going to put the gun down, you're going to get arrested, and you're going to spend the next several years learning that actions have consequences. And when you get out, if you come anywhere near Alara or her daughter, I will end you, not arrest you, not scare you, end you. Permanently. That's a promise." The first police car pulled through the gate, and Trent made his final choice. He raised the gun not toward Ronan or Alara, but toward the sky, firing twice more before dropping the weapon and falling to his knees with his hands behind his head. The next several minutes were chaos. Police swarming, weapons drawn, Trent being handcuffed and read his rights while he screamed about his baby. His rights, the injustice of it all. Officers took statements from security personnel while Marcus handled the political side, making calls to ensure the right people knew this was a domestic situation resolved without civilian casualties. Through it all, Ronan kept Alara close, one hand on her back as she watched the man who'd terrorized her for a year being stuffed into the back of a police car. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face, but there was something else in her expression too. Relief, vindication, the beginning of freedom. "It's done," Ronan said quietly. "He can't hurt you anymore." But even as he said it, Alara gasped and doubled over, her hand flying to her belly. Ronan caught her before she fell, alarm spiking through him. "What's wrong? Are you hurt? Did he—" "The baby," Alara gasped. "Something's wrong. I think—" Another contraction hit, stronger than the first, and she cried out in pain. Dr. Yates had warned them that stress could trigger early labor, that Alara's pregnancy was already complicated by months of inadequate care and constant fear. But Ronan hadn't expected it to happen now, hadn't expected the confrontation with Trent to push her body past its limits. "Call an ambulance," he shouted to Marcus. "Now!" But Alara grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "No time. The contractions are too close together. She's coming now." Terror unlike anything Ronan had felt in 20 years flooded through him. He'd faced down armed men, negotiated with killers, built an empire through calculated risk. But none of that prepared him for this moment, for the woman he'd loved since childhood going into premature labor on his front steps because he'd let her face the monster who'd hurt her. "I'm here," he said, scooping her into his arms. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes that felt like hours. Paramedics loaded Alara onto a stretcher while she gripped Ronan's hand hard enough to leave marks, her face contorted with pain and fear. "Stay with me," she begged. "Please don't leave me alone." "I'm not going anywhere." Ronan climbed into the ambulance beside her, ignoring the paramedics' protest about space. "I'll be right here the whole time." As the ambulance raced toward the hospital with sirens screaming, Alara fought through contractions that came harder and faster than they should have, her body trying to deliver a baby 3 weeks too early. The paramedics worked around Ronan, monitoring vitals, preparing equipment, their faces professionally calm but their eyes telegraphing concern. "How far apart are the contractions?" one asked. 2 minutes, the other replied. "Blood pressure's elevated, heart rate at 140. We need to get her to L&D immediately." Alara looked up at Ronan with eyes full of fear. "What if she's not ready? What if the stress hurt her? What if—" "She's strong," Ronan said, brushing sweat-dampened hair from her forehead. "Just like her mother. She's going to fight her way into this world the same way you've been fighting, fierce and brave and absolutely refusing to give up." "I'm scared." "I know, but you're not alone, not anymore." He squeezed her hand. "Remember what you told me when we were kids? That we'd figure it out together? We're still figuring it out. You're just going to have to hold on a little longer." The hospital appeared through the ambulance windows, and suddenly they were moving again, rushed through emergency entrance, down corridors that blurred together, into a delivery room where Dr. Yates was already waiting in scrubs. 7 months and 2 weeks, she said, quickly reviewing the chart a nurse handed her. "Premature but viable. Let's get her stable and see where we are." What followed was hours of controlled chaos. Alara's labor progressed too fast for comfort, but not quite fast enough to justify emergency intervention. She was caught in that terrible in-between space, her body working to deliver a baby that wasn't quite ready, fighting through pain that seemed endless. And through it all, Ronan stayed beside her. He let her squeeze his hand until he lost feeling in his fingers, wiped her face with cool cloths, spoke quietly to her when the pain got so bad she forgot to breathe. He'd never felt more powerless than in those hours, watching her suffer and being able to do nothing but be present, be steady, be the anchor she needed. "I can't do this," Alara gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "It's too much. I can't." "Yes, you can." Ronan leaned close so she could hear him over the beeping monitors and medical instructions. "You survived Trent. You survived running alone and being afraid and starting over with nothing. You can survive this. You're the strongest person I've ever known. That girl you remember, the one who fought bullies, she's gone. I'm not her anymore. You are. You're exactly her, just older and wiser and even fiercer than you were at 9. You punched Derek Moss in the face, remember? This is just another fight, and you've never lost one that mattered." Alara laughed through tears and pain. "You remember that? I remember everything about you. Every moment, every word, every promise we made. And I'm going to make sure your daughter knows her mother is the bravest person who ever lived." Another contraction hit, and Dr. Yates moved into position. "Okay, Alara, this is it. Next contraction, you're going to push. Are you ready?" She looked at Ronan with exhaustion and determination in equal measure. "Don't leave." "Never." He kissed her forehead. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." The delivery was fast once it started. 3 pushes, 10 minutes of effort that felt eternal, and then a sound that stopped Ronan's heart before restarting it with new purpose. A baby's cry, thin and reedy but strong, filled the room. "It's a girl, Doctor," Yates announced, holding up a tiny, perfect human being covered in vernix and blood and absolutely beautiful. Small, but breathing on her own. Apgar score of 8. She's a fighter. They placed the baby on Alara's chest, and Ronan watched tears stream down her face as she touched her daughter for the first time, counted fingers and toes, marveled at the shock of dark hair, whispered words of love and welcome. "Hi, baby girl," Alara said softly. "Hi, Maeve, I'm your mom, and I promise you're going to be safe. I promise you're going to be loved. I promise no one will ever hurt you the way—" She couldn't finish, overcome by emotion and exhaustion and relief that her daughter was here, was healthy, was real. Ronan stood beside them, this woman he'd known as a fierce child and found again as a fierce adult, and the baby she'd fought so hard to protect. He felt something shift in his chest, a transformation he hadn't known was possible, a softening of edges he'd thought were permanently hardened. "Can I hold her?" he asked quietly. Alara looked up at him with trust that felt like absolution. "Of course. You're her Uncle Ronan, your family." He took the baby carefully, terrified he'd break something so small and fragile. But Maeve settled against his chest like she belonged there, her tiny hand curling around his finger, her eyes, dark blue and unfocused, somehow seeming to see right through him. "Hey there," he whispered. "I'm Ronan. I knew your mom when she was brave and fearless, and I'm going to make sure you grow up just like her. Safe, protected, knowing you can be anything you want because nobody's going to stand in your way." Dr. Yates smiled as she worked. "She's going to need to stay in the NICU for a few days, just for observation. Being 3 weeks early means her lungs need monitoring. We want to make sure she's feeding well. But all signs are good." As if on cue, nurses came to take Maeve for her initial assessments. Ronan handed her back reluctantly, already feeling the absence of that tiny weight against his chest. They wheeled her away, and Alara reached for his hand. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For remembering me, for protecting me, for being here when I needed you most. You don't need to thank me for keeping a promise I made 20 years ago. We were children. Those promises didn't mean anything in the real world. They meant everything to me." Ronan sat on the edge of her hospital bed. "You were the first person who ever stood beside me. The first person who made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth defending. I spent 20 years trying to find you, and when you walked into my house, pregnant, afraid, hiding from a man who hurt you, I knew I'd been given a chance to pay back what you gave me all those years ago." Alara was quiet for a moment. "What happens now? Trent's been arrested, but he'll be charged with multiple felonies. Illegal discharge of a firearm, terroristic threats. violating the restraining order. Rebecca Chen is already building a case that'll keep him locked up for years. Ronan's voice hardened. And if by some miracle he gets out and comes near you or Maeve, he'll disappear in ways that have nothing to do with the legal system. I don't want you to become a killer because of me. I've been a lot of things for a lot of reasons. If protecting you makes me one more thing, I'll live with that. He touched her face gently. You and Maeve are safe now. That's all that matters. Exhaustion was pulling Alara under, the adrenaline finally fading and leaving only the bone-deep weariness of a woman who'd just given birth after the most stressful day of her life. Her eyes drifted closed. Stay, she murmured. I'm not going anywhere, Ronan promised. And he didn't. While Alara slept and Maeve was monitored in the NICU and the rest of the world kept spinning, Ronan Vale sat in a hospital chair and watched over the two people who'd somehow become his entire world in the span of a few weeks. Outside, Marcus handled the aftermath, coordinating with police, ensuring the media didn't turn this into a circus, making sure every legal protection available was put in place to keep Trent Mercer away permanently. But inside that hospital room, there was only peace, hard-won and precious, built from childhood loyalty and adult protection, from promises kept across decades and violence met with greater force. Ronan looked at Alara sleeping, at the monitors showing Maeve's strong heartbeat in another room, and felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Hope. Not for himself, but for them, for the future they could build now that the shadow of Trent Mercer had been removed. A future where Alara could rebuild the fierce, fearless parts of herself that abuse had tried to destroy, where Maeve could grow up knowing she was wanted, protected, loved beyond measure, and where Ronan could finally understand that the power he'd spent 2 decades accumulating meant nothing compared to the power of being there when it mattered most. The boy who'd thrown rocks at bullies had grown into a man who could move mountains, but in the end, it was still about the same thing it had always been, standing beside someone who needed him and refusing to let them face their battles alone. Maeve spent 5 days in the NICU, and Ronan spent 5 days learning what it meant to care about something more fragile than any empire he'd built. He watched through glass as nurses monitored her breathing, adjusted feeding tubes, checked vitals with practiced efficiency. Each beep of the monitors, each slight change in her oxygen levels, sent his heart racing in ways that facing armed enemies never had. Alara recovered in a private room 2 floors up, and Ronan split his time between mother and daughter, bringing updates, sitting in silence when words felt inadequate, simply being present in a way he'd never allowed himself to be for anyone else. On the 3rd day, Rebecca Chen arrived with documents that would change everything. Trent Mercer has been formally charged, she said, spreading papers across the small table in Alara's room. Illegal discharge of a firearm, criminal threatening, violating a restraining order, and based on testimony from his ex-girlfriends who finally agreed to come forward, multiple counts of domestic assault from previous relationships. Alara's hands trembled as she looked at the paperwork. How long? The DA is pushing for 8 to 12 years. With his record, the witnesses willing to testify, and the fact that he fired a weapon on private property while making threats, the judge isn't going to be sympathetic. Rebecca's expression softened. He won't be getting near you or Maeve for a very long time, and I've filed for emergency custody and a permanent order of protection. He has no legal claim to your daughter. The relief that washed over Alara's face was so profound it hurt to witness. He can't take her? Even when he gets out? He'd have to prove he's rehabilitated, go through supervised visits, convince a judge that he's no longer a threat. Given his history and the severity of the charges, that's nearly impossible. Rebecca glanced at Ronan. And if he ever does get released and violates the protection order, well, I imagine Mr. Vale has contingency plans for that scenario. Ronan's silence was answer enough. After Rebecca left, Alara sat in her hospital bed staring at the papers that represented her freedom. It's really over. He's really gone. He's gone, Ronan confirmed. And even if the legal system fails, which it won't, I've made arrangements. Trent Mercer will never hurt you again. That's not a hope or a wish. That's a guarantee. I don't know how to feel. I should be happy, relieved, but mostly I just feel... She trailed off, searching for words. Empty? Ronan suggested. Like you've been carrying something heavy for so long that you don't know what to do with yourself now that it's gone. Yes, exactly that. She looked at him with renewed understanding. "You've felt this before. Different circumstances, but yeah. When you finally escape something that's defined you for years, there's a void where the survival instinct used to be. You have to learn how to live instead of just survive, and that's harder than it sounds." Elara was quiet for a moment, then asked the question that had been hovering between them since the night at the gate. "What happens to us now? To me and Maeve? We can't stay at your estate forever. We can't keep accepting your help without—" "Why not?" "Because I need to stand on my own. I need to build a life that's mine, not dependent on someone else's protection or charity." She met his eyes. "I'm grateful, Ronan, more than I can ever express. But I can't go from being controlled by Trent to being dependent on you. I need to know I can do this by myself." Ronan had been expecting this conversation, had known it was coming from the moment Maeve was born. Elara wasn't the kind of person who'd trade one form of dependence for another, even when the new situation was built on care instead of control. "I understand," he said. "But hear me out before you make any decisions." He pulled his chair closer to her bed, choosing his words carefully. "You need time to recover, to bond with Maeve, to figure out what you want your life to look like. That takes months, not days. Stay at the estate through the recovery period. Let yourself heal without worrying about rent or bills or how you're going to manage a newborn alone. And then? Then we figure out what comes next. Maybe you go back to school. You mentioned wanting to finish your degree once. Maybe you find work that actually interests you instead of just pays the bills. Maybe you discover you want to start a business or travel or do something completely different." He leaned forward. "The point is, you get to choose. For the first time in years, you get to actually choose your path without fear or desperation driving the decision." Alara's eyes filled with tears. "You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. It's going to be hard and scary, and there will be days you question everything. But you won't be alone. You'll have support, resources, and someone who remembers the girl who punched bullies in the face and knows she's still in there somewhere." "What if I can't find her? That girl who was fearless?" "Then you build a new version, one who's been through hell and came out stronger. Who knows what she's capable of surviving?" Ronan reached across and took her hand. "You don't have to be the same person you were at 9, Elara. You just have to be someone who refuses to let the past define the future." That night, when Elara was finally cleared to visit the NICU, Ronan watched her hold Maeve for the first time without monitors and tubes separating them. Mother and daughter, both fighters, both survivors, beginning to heal together. "She has your nose," Elara said softly, tracing the tiny features with one finger. "And I think she's going to have dark hair like mine." "She's perfect," Ronan said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. "Do you want to hold her?" He took Maeve carefully, marveling again at how something so small could feel so significant. She made a soft sound, not quite crying, and her eyes opened, clearer now than they'd been at birth, dark and curious. "Hi, Trouble," he whispered. "Your mom and I have been having some important conversations about your future. Thought you should know you've got options. Whatever you want to be, whoever you want to become, you're going to have the resources to make it happen." "You're going to spoil her," Elara said, but she was smiling. "Absolutely. That's what uncles are for." He looked up at Elara. "If that's okay with you, the uncle thing. I know we haven't really defined what this is, what we are to each other now." "Your family," Elara said simply. "You always were, even when we were apart. You're the person who remembered me when I'd forgotten myself, who stood beside me when I needed it most. If that's not family, I don't know what is." The word settled into Ronan's chest like something he'd been missing without knowing it. Family. Not the kind built from blood or obligation, but the kind forged through choice and loyalty and showing up when it mattered. 3 weeks later, Elara and Maeve came home to the Vale estate, not as employees or temporary guests, but as permanent residents of the East Wing suite that had been transformed into a proper home. Ronan had hired designers to create a nursery that somehow managed to be both luxurious and warm, filled with soft colors and comfortable furniture and everything a new mother might need. "This is too much," Elara said for the 100th time, standing in a nursery that probably costs more than most people's annual salary. "It's exactly right," Ronan countered. "Maeve deserves a room that's safe and comfortable. You deserve space to be a mother without worrying about whether you can afford diapers or formula or a decent crib. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway with her usual impeccable timing. Mr. Vale, the contractors are here about the security upgrades you requested. Tell them I'll be down in 10 minutes. After she left, Ronan turned back to Alara. I'm having additional cameras installed around the perimeter, upgrading the alert systems, just as a precaution. Trent's in jail. For now. But paranoia has kept me alive this long, and I'm not taking chances with you or Maeve. Over the following months, they settled into a rhythm that felt natural despite its unconventional nature. Alara focused on recovering and caring for Maeve, slowly rebuilding her strength and confidence. Ronan continued running his empire but found himself adjusting schedules to be present for the moments that mattered. When Maeve smiled for the first time, when she rolled over, when she started recognizing voices and faces. Sunday mornings became sacred. No business calls, no meetings, just breakfast together in the estate kitchen where Ronan made pancakes that were somehow both burned and undercooked, and Alara laughed at his culinary incompetence while Maeve watched from her bouncer seat with wide, curious eyes. You're terrible at this, Alara said one Sunday, poking at a pancake that had the consistency of rubber. I'm excellent at many things. Cooking just isn't one of them. Ronan flipped another pancake with more hope than skill. Besides, Maeve doesn't seem to mind. As if on cue, the baby made a happy gurgling sound, and they both laughed. These moments, simple, domestic, far removed from the violence and strategy that defined most of Ronan's life, had become the parts he looked forward to most. 6 months after Maeve's birth, Alara made an announcement over dinner. I've been thinking about going back to school, getting my degree in accounting like I originally planned. She said it tentatively, like she expected pushback or dismissal. That's fantastic, Ronan said. What would you need to make it happen? Time, mostly. Childcare during classes? Money for tuition? She paused. I've been saving what I can from the stipend you've been giving me. The stipend is for living expenses, not tuition. Education is a separate budget. Ronan pulled out his phone and made a note. Which school were you thinking? I don't know yet. I need to research programs, figure out what transfers from before, whether I can do some courses online. She was rambling now, excited and nervous in equal measure. Make a list of what you need. I'll have Catherine help coordinate everything. When Alara started to protest, Ronan held up a hand. This isn't charity. This is investment. You're smart, talented, and you deserve the chance to use those gifts. Let me help make that possible. Why? The question came out raw, vulnerable. Why do you keep doing this? I understand protecting me from Trent. I understand making sure Maeve is safe, but paying for my education, supporting my dreams, what do you get out of it? Ronan was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. When we were kids, you told me we'd figure it out together. We'd find a way to have enough of everything, to build lives that weren't defined by poverty and fear. I found my way. Not the way we imagined, but I got there. Now I'm making sure you get there too. That's what figuring it out together means. Alara's eyes filled with tears. I'm not that girl anymore. I'm not the one who punched bullies and shared cookies and made big promises. Yes, you are. You're just older, wiser, and carrying battle scars that girl never imagined she'd have. But you're still fierce, still fighting, still refusing to let circumstances define you. He reached across the table and took her hand. I see her every time you stand up to me, every time you insist on independence, every time you push yourself to be more than what Trent tried to make you. She's still there, Alara. She never left. That night, after Maeve was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Alara found Ronan in his study going through reports that probably involved illegal activities she was better off not knowing about. Can I ask you something? She said from the doorway. Always. Do you ever regret it? The path you took to get here? The things you've had to do? Ronan set down the papers and really considered the question. I regret that I had to become this version of myself to survive. I regret that the world doesn't reward good people who play by the rules. But do I regret having the power to protect the people I care about, to make sure you and Maeve are safe? No, I don't regret that at all. Even if it means you're... She trailed off, not quite willing to say the word. A criminal? A killer? Someone parents warn their children about? Ronan's smile was sad. I know what I am, Alara. I've known for a long time. But I also know that if I'd stayed powerless, stayed poor, played by rules designed to keep people like us in our place, I never would have been able to help you when you needed it most. So yeah, I made choices. Some of them terrible. But they led me here, to this moment. And I can't bring myself to regret that. Alara crossed the room and sat in the chair across from his desk. I think about Trent sometimes, about how he's probably sitting in a cell right now, angry and bitter and convinced he's the victim in all of this. He is sitting in a cell. Marcus keeps tabs, and you're right. He's convinced himself he did nothing wrong, that you and I are the villains in his story. Does that bother you? Not even a little. Men like Trent never accept responsibility. They rewrite history to make themselves the hero, the victim, anything except the abuser. Ronan leaned back in his chair. But his story doesn't matter anymore. Yours does. What you build, who you become, the life you create for yourself and Maeve, that's what matters. As the months turned into a year, Alara enrolled in community college and discovered she had a talent for numbers that translated into excellent grades and professors who encouraged her to consider graduate school. She built a routine that balanced motherhood and education, supported by childcare arranged through the estate staff who'd come to love Maeve like their own. Maeve grew from a tiny preemie into a healthy, happy 1-year-old with her mother's dark hair and a personality that was already showing signs of the fierce independence that ran in her blood. She took her first steps in the estate library, surrounded by priceless books and 2 adults who cheered like she'd won an Olympic medal. "Did you see that?" Alara laughed, scooping up her daughter. "You're walking. You're actually walking." Ronan captured it on his phone, already planning to have the moment printed and framed. "She's going to be running before we know it, probably running us into the ground." "She gets that from you," Alara teased. "The determination to do everything her own way. She gets that from both of us. We're both stubborn as hell." The easy affection between them had grown naturally over the months. A partnership built on shared history and mutual respect, on showing up for each other without expectation of reward. They weren't lovers, weren't trying to force themselves into a romantic relationship that neither of them needed. But they were family in the truest sense, bound by choice and loyalty and love that didn't require physical expression to be real. Trent's trial came and went with a guilty verdict on all counts. He was sentenced to 10 years, and Rebecca ensured that Alara's testimony was delivered via video so she wouldn't have to face him in person. When the verdict was read, Alara felt the final piece of her old life fall away, leaving space for the new one she'd been carefully building. "It's really over," she said that night, sitting with Ronan on the terrace while Maeve slept upstairs. "He's gone. I'm free, and I actually believe it this time." "What are you going to do with that freedom?" "Everything." She smiled, and Ronan saw the fierce girl he'd known 20 years ago shining through. "I'm going to finish my degree, get my CPA license, maybe start my own firm someday. I'm going to raise Maeve to be strong and kind and absolutely fearless. I'm going to travel, learn new things, build a life that's so full of light that the dark parts fade into background noise." "That sounds perfect. And I want to do something else." Alara turned to face him. "I want to help other women like me. Women running from abuse, trying to rebuild their lives, scared and alone with nowhere to go. I've been researching domestic violence shelters, transition programs, legal aid resources. There's so much need and not enough support." Ronan had been expecting this too. Alara had always been someone who defended the weak, who stood up to bullies, who couldn't walk past injustice without trying to fix it. Of course she'd want to use her experience to help others. "What would you need to make that happen?" he asked. "Funding, mostly. Space for women to stay while they get back on their feet, legal resources, job training programs, childcare." Her eyes were bright with passion and purpose. "I know it's ambitious, probably too ambitious, but I keep thinking about what it would have meant if I'd had somewhere safe to go when I first left Trent. Somewhere that offered more than just a bed and basic meals. Somewhere that actually helped women build new lives instead of just surviving day to day." "Let's do it." Alara blinked. "What?" "Let's build what you're describing. A full-service transition center for domestic violence survivors. Housing, legal aid, education, job training, therapy, childcare, everything needed to actually break the cycle." Ronan was already planning, already calculating costs and resources, and how to structure it for maximum impact. I'll provide the funding and you run it. Your vision, your rules, your mission. Ronan, that would cost millions. I have millions. More than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And I've been looking for ways to use that money for something that matters. Something beyond just accumulating more power and territory. He looked at her seriously. You want to help women escape what you escaped? I want to help you do that. Consider it paying forward the favor you did me all those years ago when you stood up to Derek Moss. Ilara's eyes filled with tears. One punch on an elementary school playground doesn't equal millions of dollars in funding for a shelter. That punch meant everything to a scared kid who thought nobody would ever stand beside him. It changed the trajectory of my entire life. Ronan's voice was soft but certain. Let me do this. Let me help you build something that gives other women what I'm giving you, a chance to become who they're meant to be without fear or violence holding them back. 2 years after Maeve's birth, the Ilara Reeves Foundation for Survivors opened its doors in a renovated building in Brooklyn, not far from where Ronan and Ilara had grown up. It offered everything Ilara had envisioned and more. Transitional housing for up to 20 women and their children, a full-time legal team that specialized in restraining orders and custody battles, job training programs in partnership with local businesses, therapy services, and childcare that allowed mothers to work or attend school without worrying about their children's safety. The opening ceremony was small and private. Just Ilara, Ronan, Maeve, and the first 3 families moving into the shelter. Ilara gave a speech about second chances and the power of having someone stand beside you when you were ready to fight back, and Ronan watched her with pride that felt almost painful in its intensity. This was who she was meant to be, not a maid scrubbing floors at midnight, not a woman hiding from her abuser, but a fierce defender of people who needed someone to believe in them when they couldn't believe in themselves. After the ceremony, while Maeve played with the other children in the brand new playground, Ilara found Ronan standing alone, looking at the building they'd created together. Thank you, she said, for all of this, for believing in it, for making it possible, for standing beside me while I figured out who I wanted to become. You did the hard part. I just provided resources. You provided more than that. You provided hope when I'd forgotten what that felt like. You showed me that power doesn't have to corrupt, that strength can be used to protect instead of control. She took his hand. You became the person we dreamed about being when we were kids, someone who had enough of everything and used it to make the world a little less cruel. Ronan looked down at their joined hands, at Maeve laughing in the playground, at the building full of women getting second chances they deserved. We figured it out together, just like you said we would. Yeah, Ilara smiled. We did. 3 years after Maeve's birth, Ilara graduated summa cum laude with her accounting degree. Ronan and Maeve sat in the audience, cheering louder than anyone, and afterward they celebrated with ice cream and a trip to the park where Maeve's favorite swings were. What's next? Ronan asked as they watched Maeve play. Graduate school eventually, but first I'm focusing on the foundation. We've had 30 women come through the program, and 23 of them have successfully transitioned to independent living. That's a success rate most programs dream about. It's because you're running it. Because you understand what they need in a way someone who hasn't lived it never could. I had advantages most of them don't have. I had you. Ilara bumped his shoulder with hers. Not everyone gets a crime boss guardian angel. Retired crime boss, Ronan corrected. Mostly. It was true. Over the past 3 years, Ronan had been systematically legitimizing his operations, shifting focus from the gray areas toward businesses that could stand up to legal scrutiny. It was a slow process, complicated by the reality that you didn't just walk away from the criminal underworld without consequences. But he was building something different, still powerful but cleaner, still strategic but legal, still capable of protecting the people he cared about without constantly looking over his shoulder for federal investigations. Why the change? Ilara asked. You spent 20 years building your empire. Why risk it now by going legitimate? Ronan watched Maeve climb the jungle gym with the fearless determination of a 3-year-old who didn't understand danger yet. Because I want to be someone she can be proud of knowing, someone whose legacy isn't built on bodies and territory disputes, someone who proves you can be powerful without being destructive. She's already proud of you. She calls you Uncle Ronan and tells everyone at preschool that you're the strongest man in the world. I want to earn that. I want to be someone worthy of that kind of uncomplicated trust. He turned to Ilara. You made me remember who I was before I became what I needed to be to survive. and I like that person better than the man I've been for the past 20 years. That night, after Maeve was asleep and the house was quiet, Ronan found himself in the library where he'd first realized Alara was the girl from his childhood. So much had changed since that midnight encounter. The scared, bruised woman had transformed into someone confident and purposeful. The premature baby had become a vibrant little girl, and he'd discovered that the power he'd spent decades accumulating meant nothing compared to the power of being present for the people who mattered. Alara found him there, 2 glasses of wine in her hands. She passed him one and settled into the chair beside his. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the future, about what comes next." "What did you come up with?" "I want to expand the foundation, open locations in other cities, help more women, build a network of support that doesn't depend on luck or one person's resources." She took a sip of wine. "But I also want something else, something personal." "What's that?" "I want Maeve to have siblings. Not right now, not for a few years, but eventually. I want her to grow up knowing what it's like to have someone who always has your back, the way you had mine when we were kids." Ronan felt something shift in his chest. "Are you saying you want to date? Meet someone?" "Maybe. Someday. When I'm ready to trust someone like that again." She looked at him carefully. "Would that bother you? If I met someone, started building that kind of life?" He took a moment to really examine the question and his feelings about it. Would it bother him to watch Alara fall in love with someone else? Build a romantic relationship that didn't include him? Maybe a little, if he was honest. But more than that, he wanted her to have everything she deserved. Love without violence, partnership without control, someone who'd stand beside her the way she deserved. "It wouldn't bother me," he said truthfully. "I want you to have that if it's what you want. You deserve someone who sees how extraordinary you are, who treats you like you're precious instead of property." "What about you?" Alara asked. "Do you ever think about finding someone, building something beyond your empire and this found family we've created?" "Honestly, no. I've spent so long being someone people fear that I'm not sure I know how to be someone people could love romantically." He smiled sadly. "I'm good at protection and strategy and solving problems. I'm not sure I'm good at vulnerability or trust or any of the things real intimacy requires." "You're good at it with me, with Maeve." "That's different. You knew me before. You see past the reputation to the scared kid underneath." Ronan swirled his wine. "But starting fresh with someone new, explaining what I've done, what I've been, I'm not sure anyone could accept that." "You might be surprised. People are more complicated than you give them credit for." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. 2 people who'd found their way back to each other across decades and completely different lives, who'd built something that didn't fit conventional definitions but worked perfectly for them. 5 years after Maeve's birth, Alara received a letter that changed everything one more time. Trent had been granted early parole for good behavior, and he'd be released in 6 months. She read the letter 3 times before showing it to Ronan, and when she did, her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "He's getting out." Ronan took the letter, read it quickly, and his expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. "Rebecca will file to extend the restraining order, and I'll make sure he understands that parole comes with conditions he can't afford to violate." "I'm not afraid of him anymore," Alara said, and realized it was true. "He can't hurt me. He has no power over me. Whatever monster he was in my mind, he's just a man now, a pathetic man who spent 5 years in prison because he couldn't accept that I didn't belong to him. That doesn't mean we take chances. He's proven he's dangerous. I know. But I also know I'm not the same person he terrorized. I've built a life, raised a daughter, created something meaningful that helps other women escape what I escaped. He didn't break me. He tried, but he failed." Her voice was fierce with conviction. "And if he comes near me or Maeve, he'll learn that I'm not someone he can intimidate anymore." Ronan saw the girl who'd punched Derek Moss shining through, and he smiled despite the situation. "There she is. I knew she was still in there." When Trent was released 6 months later, he violated his parole within a week by attempting to contact Alara through social media. Rebecca had him arrested immediately, and the parole violation sent him back to prison to serve the remainder of his original sentence plus additional time. Alara watched it happen from a distance, felt the final piece of fear dissolve, and understood that she was truly free. Not because Trent was back in prison, but because she'd stopped giving him power over her emotional state. He was just someone from her past now, not the monster who haunted her present. 7 years after Maeve's birth, Alara stood at a podium accepting an award for her work with domestic violence survivors. Her foundation had expanded to 5 cities, helped hundreds of women transition to independent living, and become a model that other organizations studied and replicated. Ronan sat in the audience beside Maeve, now a bright, confident 7-year-old who told anyone who'd listened that her mother was a superhero who saved people. He watched Alara speak with confidence and grace about second chances and the power of having someone believe in you, and felt pride so intense it was almost overwhelming. This was what success looked like. Not money or territory or power over others, but helping someone become who they were meant to be. Watching them transform from broken to whole, from terrified to fierce. After the ceremony, they went back to the estate for what had become their Sunday tradition. Ronan's terrible pancakes, Maeve's elaborate stories about her week at school, the easy comfort of family that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. "I've been offered a position," Alara said as they cleaned up after breakfast. "Director of a national coalition of domestic violence programs. It would mean travel, speaking engagements, working with legislators to improve protections for survivors." "That's incredible. Are you going to take it?" "I want to, but it would mean being away from home more, relying on you to help with Maeve more than I already do." She paused. "Is that something you'd be willing to do? Because I won't accept unless I know she's being cared for by someone I trust completely." Ronan looked at Maeve, who was currently using syrup to draw pictures on her plate, completely oblivious to the adult conversation happening around her. 7 years ago, he'd been a man who thought only in terms of power and profit, who'd built walls so high nothing soft could get through. Now he was someone who made terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings and attended school plays and read bedtime stories about princesses and dragons. "I'd be honored," he said. "Maeve and I will hold down the fort while you go save the world." Alara's eyes filled with tears. "How did I get so lucky? To find you again, to have you in our lives, to have someone who never asks for anything but gives everything? You were brave enough to run when staying would have killed you. You were strong enough to accept help when you needed it, and you were fierce enough to rebuild yourself into someone who helps others do the same." Ronan pulled her into a hug. "I'm the lucky one. You reminded me that power without purpose is just noise. You gave me something worth protecting beyond territory and reputation. You gave me family." 10 years after Maeve's birth, Ronan stood in the same library where he'd first recognized Alara and realized that everything he'd built, the empire, the wealth, the power, had led him to this moment. To Sunday mornings with terrible pancakes and a little girl who called him uncle, and a woman who'd transformed from victim to survivor to warrior. Alara found him there, Maeve already in bed after a long day at the park. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked. "Just thinking about how different things are from what I imagined when we were kids." "Better or worse?" "Different. We didn't become what we thought we would. We became something neither of us could have predicted." He turned to face her. "You said we'd figure it out together. We'd find a way to have enough of everything, and we did. Just not the way we thought." "No," Alara agreed. "It's better than what we imagined. Because we didn't just get enough, we got everything that matters. Safety, purpose, family, love that doesn't demand or control, but just exists steady and real." She was right. They'd built something that couldn't be defined by conventional terms. Not quite romantic love, but deeper than friendship. Not quite co-parenting, but more involved than chosen family usually implied. They were partners in the truest sense, two people who'd promised to figure it out together and kept that promise across 20 years of separation and completely different paths. "I got a call from the DA's office," Ronan said. "Trent's up for parole again in 2 years. They wanted to know if we'd oppose it." "Will we? Do you want to?" Alara considered the question seriously. "No. Let him out. Let him try to rebuild his life if he's capable of it. He can't hurt us anymore. We're too strong, too protected, too far beyond his reach. And I'd rather spend energy helping women escape situations like mine than spend it keeping one pathetic man locked up." It was the answer Ronan had expected. The response of someone who'd transformed pain into purpose, who'd chosen to use her power for creation instead of destruction. "All right," he said, "we won't oppose it. But if he violates the restraining order, then you'll handle it. I know." She smiled. You've always handled things. That's what you do." They stood together in the library, watching moonlight stream through windows, surrounded by books and memories, and the life they'd built from the ruins of childhood poverty and adult violence. Somewhere upstairs, Maeve slept safe and warm, dreaming whatever dreams occupied the mind of a 10-year-old who'd never known fear because she'd been protected from birth by two people who understood what it meant to be powerless, and had vowed she'd never experienced that herself. "Thank you," Alara said softly, "for remembering me, for standing beside me, for showing me that power can be used to protect instead of control." "Thank you for punching Derek Moss in the face," Ronan replied, "for sharing your cookies, for being the first person to make me believe I was worth defending. Everything I became, everything I built, started with that moment on the playground when you chose to stand beside a scared kid who had nothing to offer you in return. You had everything to offer. You just didn't know it yet." Years continued to pass, marked by Maeve's graduations and achievements, by the Foundation's expansion and impact, by Ronan's successful transition from crime boss to legitimate businessman with a reputation for strategic philanthropy. They settled into a life that looked nothing like what childhood friends might have predicted, but felt exactly right for who they'd become. Alara eventually did meet someone, a lawyer who worked with the Foundation, who understood her past and admired her strength, who made her laugh and treated her like she was precious. Ronan watched them fall in love with genuine happiness, knowing that Alara deserved someone who could give her romantic partnership in ways he never could. And when Maeve asked if this meant she'd have a stepdad, Ronan explained that family came in many forms, that she was lucky enough to have multiple people who loved her, and that love wasn't diminished by being shared. It multiplied. On Maeve's 18th birthday, Ronan gave her a letter he'd written when she was born, sealed and saved for this exact moment. She opened it in front of him and Alara, now joined by Alara's partner David and the extended family they'd built from choice and loyalty. The letter told the story of two kids who'd made promises on a fire escape about figuring it out together, about having enough of everything, about building lives that weren't defined by fear. It told how those kids had grown into adults who'd lost each other and found each other again at exactly the right moment. It told how one of those adults had been brave enough to run, strong enough to rebuild, fierce enough to transform pain into purpose that helped hundreds of other women escape the same violence. And it told Maeve that she was the product of that bravery, that strength, that fierce determination to build something better, that she'd been loved from the moment she existed, protected before she was born, surrounded by people who'd vowed she'd never know the powerlessness they'd experienced. "You get to choose who you become," the letter concluded. "Not because of luck or circumstance, but because people fought to give you that choice. Your mother fought by running and rebuilding. I fought by using everything I'd built to make sure she was safe. And together, we created space for you to be whoever you want to be without fear or violence or poverty limiting your options. That's our gift to you. Use it well." Maeve read the letter twice, tears streaming down her face, then threw her arms around both of them. "I love you both so much," she said. "Thank you for fighting for me before I could fight for myself." That night, after the party ended and guests departed, Ronan and Alara stood on the terrace watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "We did it," Alara said softly. "We figured it out together." "We did," Ronan agreed. "Not the way we imagined, but we got there." "Better than we imagined," Alara corrected, "because we didn't just save ourselves. We saved each other, and we used what we built to help others do the same." Ronan thought about the scared 8-year-old who'd thrown rocks at bullies, about the ruthless crime boss who'd built an empire on violence and strategy, about the man he'd become through the simple act of keeping a 20-year-old promise to a girl who'd shared her cookies and stood beside him when no one else would. He thought about Alara, fierce at 9, broken at 25, transformed into someone who turned her pain into purpose and helped hundreds of women escape the violence she'd survived. He thought about Maeve, born 3 weeks early from stress and fear, now a young woman ready to take on the world with all the advantages they'd fought to give her. And he understood that this was what power was truly for. Not accumulating wealth or controlling territory or making people afraid of your name, but protecting the vulnerable, creating opportunities for those who'd been denied them, building something that outlasted your own life and made the world incrementally less cruel. "Do you ever regret it?" Alara asked. "The path you took, the things you had to do to get here?" Ronan considered the question one final time. I regret that the world made that path necessary. I regret that being good and playing by rules isn't enough to lift people out of poverty and powerlessness. But do I regret having the resources to protect you when you needed it? To give Maeve opportunities we never had? To build something meaningful that helps other women escape what you escaped? He shook his head. No, I don't regret that at all. They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who'd promised to figure it out together and kept that promise through decades of separation and reunion, through violence and healing, through building and rebuilding. The boy who'd been powerless had become powerful. The girl who'd been fearless had been broken and made herself whole again. Together, they'd created something that transcended both their pasts, a future built on choice instead of necessity, on love instead of fear, on the understanding that real strength came not from the ability to hurt, but from the willingness to protect. And somewhere inside the estate, a young woman slept with dreams of who she might become, protected by people who'd fought to give her that choice, surrounded by love that asked nothing in return except that she use her freedom well. That was the real victory. Not survival, but transformation. Not just escape, but creation. Not just figuring it out, but building something that helped others do the same. They'd promised on a fire escape 20 years ago that they'd figure it out together. And they had. They really had.